A blizzard, like a terrifying whirlwind, violently battered the walls of the gloomy castle. By the window was a table, and on it, a small plate held a sandwich made of 2 slices of stale bread and some jam. The young woman walked over, took a box of matches from her dress pocket, and lit one. She picked up the plate with the food, blew out the match, and Honey wished herself a happy birthday. She was all alone in this castle, desperately struggling to survive, and today she turned 19. But even on this day, the people outside wished for her swift demise. That day was seared into her mind, leaving an incredibly deep scar on her heart. It was when Emperor Frederick ordered Honey to be transferred to MacLeod Castle. But the people around them thought this punishment was too light. They remembered that her mother had tried to poison the Empress, and because of it, they had lost the imperial grandson who was in the Empress's womb at the time. So the people began to plead with His Majesty to rescind the order and reconsider the severity of the punishment. Frederick, burning with rage, ordered everyone to shut up immediately, promising that if they didn't comply, they would be locked in the castle with Honey. Being locked up in the icy castle of MacLeod was basically a death sentence. Frederick claimed it was a better option than executing his sister, who had done nothing. The castle was situated atop a snowy mountain, surrounded by eternal winter. The mountain was once lush and green, but it was frozen over about 500 years ago. The emperor at the time defeated a dragon that possessed ice magic. When the imperial sword pierced the dragon's heart, an incredible power erupted. It instantly froze the entire mountain, causing nearby villages to be encased in ice and resulting in hundreds of casualties. Even after 500 years, the forest remained unchanged, preserving the terrifying scene of that event as if it were yesterday. But as if being exiled there wasn't enough for Honey, she had unbelievably inherited the dragon's power. The girl collapsed onto the floor, feeling that her life was completely over. If there was a God, He wouldn't have let this happen. In a life where she couldn't feel even a sliver of warmth, what else could she hope for? She placed a hand over her heart and broke down, believing that a person couldn't live without feeling love. Now, with what little she had left, she decided to commit her first sin. After summoning some icicles in the air, the girl closed her eyes and prepared herself. A second later, she was lying in a pool of her own blood, feeling a pleasant warmth for the first time. If there was truly someone listening to her in this place, Honey only wished to be born in a place that wasn't so damn cold. Suddenly, she snapped her eyes open to find herself lying in bed. She shot up, clutching her head. Standing across from the bed was Honey's mother, Eleanor, who was furiously screaming at her daughter, calling her a useless idiot. The heroine thought this might be her life flashing before her eyes. But why this particular memory? The still fuming woman stomped over to the little girl's desk and snatched her music box. She smashed it on the floor, declaring that a good-for-nothing like Honey should never have been born. The heroine sighed, utterly dejected, still not understanding why she had to see this. The mother screamed that every time she saw her daughter, it felt like walking through hell. Eleanor was the former empress, but even that wasn't enough for her, so she had completely lost control. After Frederick ascended the throne, she was cornered, so she took all her anger out on the child. As a child, Honey thought it was all her fault, so she kept her mouth shut and endured it in silence, never saying a word. Now, being back here again, she realized how foolish she had been. Seeing her daughter lost in thought made Eleanor even more furious. Leaning in close, the mother's eyes were crazed with rage. She slapped Honey across the face, and Honey was shocked that even scum like this thought she was a joke. Just then, the girl froze completely, feeling the sting on her cheek from the slap, and she began to wonder if she was really dead. Our girl suddenly felt a familiar power stirring within her. Looking down at her hands, she saw a blue light gently enveloping her palms. Realizing she had returned to the past and possessed her ice magic, Honey was stunned. Eleanor stood behind her, glaring at the girl who hadn't even noticed her. At that moment, the woman decided that even a defect like her daughter was looking down on her. Honey looked around, thinking that if this was her retribution, it was far too cruel. Meanwhile, a little boy with blonde hair and golden eyes was walking down a palace corridor. He glanced over, and the scene he saw left him completely stunned. A short while ago, Honey remembered the maids bringing a music box, a gift from His Majesty. Eleanor thought Frederick was mad for deciding to give the princess something right in front of her. She had placed the box on the desk in her own room. Waiting until night, After confirming everyone was asleep, Honey quietly snuck over to the gift. Opening the box, she enjoyed the beautiful sound, a sound she had never heard in her entire life. And now, that gift was smashed to pieces right before the girl's eyes. Her mother ordered her to stay quietly in her room until her wounds healed, and if Honey dared to take one step out the door, she would regret it. However, Eleanor was certain that even if her daughter wanted to leave, she wouldn't have the guts to step out of the room. After that, she started to leave the room, leaving the girl alone with her thoughts. Honey couldn't understand why she had put up with this crap before, and why she was still putting up with it now. As Eleanor was nonchalantly about to leave the room, she suddenly saw the princess dash past her. In that instant, Honey gave her mother a hard shove, sending her tumbling to the ground, hitting the floor hard. While the woman and her servants were still in shock, the girl had already bolted into the hallway, screaming for help. A few seconds later, Honey heard her mother's screams from behind, ordering them to catch her. The princess's wounds were still throbbing with pain, and she didn't know where to run. She remembered that when she lived on the snowy mountain, the emperor was the only one who made sure she had everything she needed. Knowing that only he could help her now, Honey veered sharply towards Frederick's chambers. But several pairs of women's hands reached out from nowhere, grabbing her from all sides and filling her with a wave of fear. The maids were delighted to have finally caught the runaway princess, ready to drag her back to their mistress. One of the maids was shocked that the little girl could run so fast under the circumstances. The child tried to scream for help, but someone quickly covered her mouth. Another maid reminded her that if Honey behaved, Her Highness the former Empress would forgive her. The heroine knew that if she was dragged away now, she would be completely done for. For a moment, the girl thought about using her power to freeze the maid solid, but she immediately dismissed the idea. Even with her power, she didn't want to become a monster. She tried to shout again, but the maids clamped her mouth shut tighter and began to drag her back. Suddenly, Honey saw the little boy with blonde hair and golden eyes around the corner, completely stunned by the scene before him. It was Oswald, the son of the current emperor, who could tell his father everything. But as the maids continued to drag the girl back to the room, he just stood there, frozen in horror. Honey desperately tried to scream and beg for help, but it was no use. The only thing she could do now was hope that the child would understand her and tell his father everything. Exhausted, she was practically hanging from the maid's arms, looking pleadingly at Oswald. The boy just stared back blankly, completely bewildered by what was happening. The maids reported to their mistress that everything went smoothly and they hadn't run into anyone. Eleanor didn't care who was snooping, because Frederick would never find out what was happening here. She glared at her daughter, whose escape attempt had failed miserably. What really made her angry was that the little brat had dared to push her and run away. She couldn't help but wonder, did Honey really have the nerve to defy her? In that case, she needed to put this little pest back in her place, so she grabbed her daughter's head. But just then, the maid started screaming that the royal knights were outside, sending Eleanor into a full-blown panic. The heroine immediately realized that the child must have told on her to his father. After all, the woman was terrified and started thinking frantically, ordering everyone to tidy up the room at once. They tied the little girl up, shoved her into a wardrobe, and sealed her mouth with tape. One of the maids was ordered to watch the child and make sure she didn't make a sound. Eleanor turned to Honey and told her to play dead, because they had things to discuss later. After that, she slammed the wardrobe door shut, leaving the little girl in the dark, and then rushed out to greet the knights. The knights, who had finally arrived on the scene, were led by Captain Drake and greeted Her Highness. Drake was especially pleased to see the former Empress was all right. It turned out that Emperor Frederick had ordered them to visit Her Highness, Princess Honey. Eleanor sneered, wondering when she and the Emperor had become so familiar that he would visit unannounced. But the captain paid it no mind, as he was just following the orders of the big man. She pretended to understand his point, but now was not the time, as the princess was sleeping after her etiquette lesson. Drake was confused. Did this lady really intend to defy a direct order from the emperor? Eleanor was furious that they wanted to wake the little princess just to show her off. The soldiers apologized, saying it was the emperor's order, but she immediately cut them off. Eleanor erupted, shouting that if she was no longer the empress, did her words carry no weight at all? She refused to hand over the child unless Emperor Frederick came to ask for her himself. Honey heard everything from inside the wardrobe, praying to God for some kind of miracle. Drake and his men apologized for the disturbance, and, having no other choice, took their leave. Those words sent a chill down the bound girl's spine, because if the knights left now, the princess's life would be no better than before. Suddenly, the emperor's booming voice echoed through the hallway, demanding to know what all the commotion was about. Frederick, having anticipated this kind of behavior from the former empress, had decided to come in person. Drake bowed to his majesty and apologized for not being able to handle things himself. Eleanor couldn't understand why such a busy man would bother to visit them. I mean, if he just wanted to see the princess, he could have chosen another day. But the emperor refused. He was here to see his sister, plain and simple. Did he need another reason? The girl heard him demand that they bring Princess Honey to him at once. Eleanor tried to stall, shocked by Frederick's insistence, especially since he hadn't visited in 9 years. So now, he must have a very good reason to insist on waking a sleeping child. To the woman's horror, it turned out the emperor had received a report that the princess was being dragged somewhere by her own maids. Eleanor, with a look of surprise, pretended not to understand what His Majesty was talking about. The maids also acted as if it was the first they heard of it, feigning ignorance. But Frederick just smiled in response, as he had concluded that the entire staff was in on the conspiracy. He ordered an immediate search of the palace to find Her Highness. Princess Honey. The woman screamed in terror, not understanding how they could make such a fuss over some rumor. However, the young crown prince Oswald thought the former empress's words were completely wrong, because it wasn't just a rumor. He had witnessed the event with his own eyes. Eleanor froze in shock and horror, and Frederick started to get angry with his son, who had been ordered to wait and not interfere. Oswald argued that since he was the first to see everything, he had to see it through to the end. The woman glared daggers at the highborn scum who dared to speak up. The emperor gave Eleanor one last chance to confess everything before the knights found the child. But the woman stubbornly feigned ignorance, which thoroughly enraged Frederick. The former empress was determined to remain silent, no matter what. What's more, she put on a helpless act, pretending not to understand why the emperor was treating her this way. Oswald suddenly ordered the knights to open the wardrobe in the corner, thinking the girl might be inside. Eleanor watched him in terror, frozen to the spot as a wave of icy fear washed over her. Honey, who had heard everything, looked hopefully at the closed doors, waiting for her rescuer to appear. Suddenly, a faint ray of light pierced the darkness inside the wardrobe, shining in from the outside. The doors were thrown open, revealing a horrifying sight, a terrified, bound little girl. Oswald smiled and reached out to her, welcoming the girl who no longer had to be afraid. First, he untied her painful bonds and brought her before her father. Honey couldn't believe her eyes, finally face to face with the emperor. But now she was determined not to hesitate and to take action. The girl knelt before Frederick, pleading with the emperor to protect her from her mother's attacks. Eleanor stared at her daughter in disbelief, not understanding how she could do this to her own mother. This was all the emperor needed to see. Furious, his first order was to immediately arrest the culprit and all her maids. Honey's eyes were fixed on Frederick as she heard screams from behind her, the knights moving in on the girls. Oswald suddenly walked over to the child and gently took her hand, leaving her completely bewildered. Once he confirmed the culprits were tied up, the emperor turned his attention to the children. He told them to follow him, leaving the cleanup to the knights. The girl had just breathed a sigh of relief when she heard her mother's screams. Eleanor was trembling madly like a banshee, having completely lost her mind. As if her punishment wasn't enough, she started spewing curses at her daughter, but Drake covered her mouth with his hand. Frederick was glad to finally see the woman's true colors, as she clearly thought she was untouchable, since she had brought this upon herself. The emperor ordered the captain to interrogate Eleanor harshly. He turned to the children, knowing they were likely traumatized, and just wanted to get them out of there. After that, he reached out to Honey, intending to pat her on the head. The girl flinched and recoiled, covering her head with her hands and shutting her eyes tightly. Seeing this, Frederick regretted being so careless and apologized to his little sister. He had no intention of hurting her, and to prove it, he draped his own imperial robe over Honey. Knowing all she had been through, the emperor offered to carry her. Still in shock, Honey gave a hesitant nod and suddenly found herself in His Majesty's arms. After that, he beckoned to his son, who was giving the girl a sweet smile. The father was impressed by his courage, but now they had to talk about the boy's reckless wandering. Honey had been helped, but all this warmth from the Emperor felt so foreign. Until now, she had been withering away alone in the ice palace. But was all this really happening? Her thoughts were interrupted by Oswald, who wanted to know if she was okay. Looking into his worried eyes, she felt for the first time that someone genuinely cared about her. She buried her face in Frederick's vest to hide her embarrassment, mumbling that she was fine. She hoped with all her heart that these kind gazes wouldn't be just a fleeting dream. And for now, she just wanted to bask in this warmth a little longer. Soon, the Emperor, his sister, and his son arrived safely at the palace. The head butler, Charles, and a group of servants greeted His Majesty, the son of the Empire. The man's gaze immediately fell on the injured girl in the Emperor's arms. Taking a closer look at the little one, he immediately thought they should call the royal physician. Frederick nodded in agreement, while wondering where the empresses were now. Learning they were all in the drawing room, the Emperor ordered the princess to be brought there after everything was taken care of. So for now, he decided to entrust her to the palace's exclusive maid, a young girl named Viola. The maid gently took the princess, greeted her, and invited her to come with her. Seeing this, Oswald started begging his dad to let him go. With Honey, Frederick agreed, knowing it would be difficult to get used to the relationship between the two. I mean, at first glance they looked like two children, but Honey was actually Oswald's aunt. Watching them leave, the Emperor told Charles that things were about to get a little messy in the palace. He had thought Eleanor was hiding the girl out of overprotectiveness, but the truth was much worse. Later, Frederick arrived in the drawing room, where he was greeted by his mother, Constance, and his wife, Melissa. Both empresses were very worried, as they couldn't find Oswald anywhere. But instead of explaining, the Emperor wanted to discuss something with them. Meanwhile, Viola had brought the children to the room where the princess would be examined by the doctor. Later, Honey sat in a chair, looking in the mirror, thinking she was probably about 9 years old now. She remembered the broken music box, which she used to sneak open when everyone was asleep. In those moments, she would imagine herself growing up in a happy family full of love and harmony, just like Oswald, whose parents truly cared for him and looked after him. Suddenly, Honey noticed the boy staring at her wounds. Feeling a bit embarrassed, she apologized to him, which left the crown prince completely baffled. Oswald was confused. Had the heroine done something wrong? The girl was sure he was shocked because he had seen something he shouldn't have. Then, instead of accepting the apology, the boy asked his aunt to thank him for saving them. These were his mother's words, which he, as a good and dutiful son, remembered well. The heroine was a bit flustered by this and took a good look at Oswald. Blushing, she covered her mouth and thanked her hero for saving her, a little uncertain but completely sincere. The boy's face suddenly changed, shining with a look of excitement, even fanaticism. Looking at him, Honey thought that if light could somehow gather and become a person, this is what he would look like. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, and a woman's voice asked if she could come in. Oswald agreed, and the royal physician, Agnes, entered the room. The heroine couldn't believe she was seeing one of the 3 great physicians of the Empire with her own eyes. In her past life, it was Agnes who had saved the Empress after Eleanor poisoned her. To the healer's regret, His Highness had to leave. It was necessary for the treatment, and she hoped the Crown Prince would understand. As he and Viola left, Oswald told Agnes not to bully the heroine. The healer sat across from the child, put on her gloves, and began to examine her hands. A normal child would have squirmed and cried from the pain, but Honey just frowned slightly. Agnes was very surprised. She figured this was just how the girl handled everything. When she was done, the princess's hands were completely bandaged. The girl suddenly wondered if she should show her the scars under her clothes, which shocked the doctor. Honey knew that this woman needed to report her condition to His Majesty. Agnes wondered how the little girl knew about her mission, but the child just guessed. Nevertheless, she was truly grateful to the Emperor for worrying about her and saving her from her mother. Honey thought that if she wanted a decent future, she had to show all the scars the palace had left on her. Agnes stared, almost in shock, at the princess's trembling hands. The girl hesitantly began to unbutton her dress, barely managing to control her shaking hands. The woman couldn't bear to watch and grabbed her hands, startling the princess. But the healer just wanted to help the young princess take off her clothes. After examining the scars on Her Highness's body, Agnes wrote in her report that the princess was regularly abused. After getting the help she needed, the girl finally went out to meet the waiting Oswald and Viola. The boy immediately wanted to know how everything went and if she was okay. Most importantly, he needed to know if the healer had hurt her. Honey then reassured him, telling him that thanks to him, it didn't hurt at all. For Oswald, this was a top priority, and he suggested they go to his father right away. Walking into the living room, the protagonist immediately felt the heavy, oppressive atmosphere in the air. This wasn't surprising, as the Emperor had likely revealed everything. Told the Empresses, she sat on the sofa, wanting only to know if everyone truly believed her. To begin, Frederick admitted they had already read Agnes's report, the report on her condition. Because of it, the Emperor wanted to personally thank the little one for her courage. With her physically present, an investigation was pointless, but they still needed evidence to strip Eleanor of her title. Melissa chimed in, saying they had gathered here to hear the princess's own account. The Empress wanted the girl to tell them everything she had experienced herself. The protagonist gathered her courage and described all the torment her mother had put her through, torment that had extinguished her will to live. After living under that oppression day after day, she finally broke down and tried to escape, but was caught. Frederick completely lost it upon hearing this. Why hadn't the child asked for help sooner? But he then realized that they themselves should have figured this whole damn thing out. She recalled her mother calling her a disgusting monster, saying that no one loved her and no one would help her. Besides, it would be useless even if Honey told the Emperor everything, because she was the daughter of his mortal enemy. That was why she couldn't ask for help, leaving Frederick utterly speechless. Constance simply clutched her head, completely stunned by what she had heard. The Emperor started blaming himself for not getting suspicious when Eleanor's ladies-in-waiting lied to his face. Now, he felt he had almost no right to ask for forgiveness for failing to realize the problem sooner. Oswald ran over and hugged Honey tightly, crying her name. He didn't think she was a monster in the slightest. Instead, he called the people who hurt her the real monsters. And now, he promised the princess directly that she would never be in pain again. Unable to hold back any longer, she broke down and cried on his shoulder. Finally feeling safe, Melissa came and sat beside them, giving them a big hug in full support of her son. Looking at the girl, the Empress realized how incredibly difficult it must have been for her to endure everything alone. Constance decided that they could no longer go easy on Eleanor just because she was the child's mother. Everyone agreed. Now, they had to decide what punishment the woman deserved. In that moment, the children fell sound asleep on the sofa, the ordeal finally over. A while later, Honey opened her eyes and found herself on a soft bed, in a room she didn't recognize. Meanwhile, on the other side of the bed, Oswald was also just waking up and stretching. The princess learned from him that they were now in his father's bedchambers. Honey suddenly noticed that the boy's eyes were terribly swollen. Oswald just gave a knowing smirk, because her eyes didn't look much better either. After a brief pause, the protagonists burst into laughter. The girl felt as if she had woken up from a long, damned winter. Outside the window, new buds bloomed, signaling that spring had finally come. Meanwhile, in the dungeons, a guard was trying to silence the chattering ladies-in-waiting accused of aiding Eleanor. They insisted on their innocence, claiming they were only following their mistress's orders. One of the wailing ladies-in-waiting was prepared to spill every detail of what had happened. Next to the guard stood Frederick, gazing with disgust at a cell in the distance. There she was, the former Empress, Eleanor, sitting in silence with her head bowed. All the ladies-in-waiting were talking about how cruel she was, so the Emperor wanted to hear her side of the story. But she remained silent, only occasionally shooting Frederick a glance with a crazed look in her eyes. News of Eleanor's abuse spread like wildfire both inside and outside the palace. Frederick knew that, as the former empress, she would forever be the center of public attention. But he needed a definitive reason to strip her of her title and mete out a fitting punishment. However, the emperor's real concern was how Honey would cope with it all. So he called her to his office, where she arrived accompanied by Oswald. Frederick studied the girl closely. There was something he had to tell her. With his hands folded, the emperor confessed that he planned to execute Eleanor. The girl was stunned to hear it was the exact same sentence her mother had received in her previous life. At that time, the woman had attempted to poison the emperor's mother, Constance, but failed. Afterwards, Eleanor and her child were confined to a separate palace, where they had lived ever since. But later, the woman tried to poison Melissa, and this time she succeeded. That was why she was sentenced to death, and her daughter, Honey, was imprisoned in an ice palace on a snowy mountain to live out the rest of her days. Now Eleanor's punishment was just as severe, only this time, it was because of this child. Seeing her expression, Frederick hurried to clarify that none of this was the little girl's fault. After all, her mother had already attempted to poison Constance before, so it was time she faced the consequences. The protagonist knew the emperor was worried about her, fearing she would blame herself for her mother's death. But Honey had been preparing for this since the moment she arrived. She felt no guilt at all. So she looked His Majesty directly in the eye and told him she was completely fine. Frederick was taken aback by her firm reply and the mature look in her eyes, which was well beyond her years. Just then, he dropped the bombshell. The woman had been stripped of her title and would be executed in 2 days. Then, the little one wanted to know if her mother had admitted to the abuse. As it turned out, Eleanor denied everything, proclaiming her complete innocence. The ladies in waiting were also found out. They pointed fingers at each other, hoping to save their own necks. They too would face harsh punishment. Upon hearing this, Honey decided to submit to His Majesty's command. She bowed, expressing her immense gratitude to the emperor for saving her. Frederick told her to lift her head, saying he had merely done what he should have done long ago. He was struck by how mature the girl seemed, despite being the same age as Oswald. It was only then that he realized his son was still calling the protagonist by her name. Though they were the same age, Honey was Frederick's sister, meaning Oswald should be calling her aunt. But the boy refused, wanting to call her by her name directly. His father didn't mind, but told him to get the princess's permission himself. He looked at her with sparkling eyes, hoping Her Highness would agree. As it turned out, almost no one ever used his real name. They only called him the Crown Prince. Only a select few were allowed to use his name, and Honey was one of them. That's why Oswald was so eager for her permission. The protagonist squinted at the boy's dazzling aura, thinking he could be forgiven for anything he did. Upon hearing her consent and seeing his son's ecstatic face, Frederick couldn't help but laugh. Oswald threw himself at the girl, giving her a big, warm hug. 2 days later, the day of the execution finally came. The children were in their room, relaxing, reading a book. According to Charles, His Majesty had ordered the protagonist to remain in the palace until everything settled down. I mean, what sane adult would let children witness such a horrific scene, right? So, as frustrating as it was, the protagonist knew it was the right decision. But then, Oswald snapped his book shut and told Honey to follow him. It was written all over her face. She desperately wanted to see the woman executed. And although they weren't supposed to go near the execution site, the young crown prince knew a way around it. He held out his hand to the little girl, hoping she would trust him. Deciding to worry about the consequences later, Honey agreed and took his hand. The children quietly cracked the door open and slipped out, sneaking toward an exit. Suddenly, a man's voice came from behind us, surprised to see us there. It was Captain Drake, the Emperor's right-hand man and a complete hard-ass. As it turned out, Oswald knew full well that Drake would be here. It wasn't surprising. Now, the boy wanted Drake to escort them to the palace gates himself. The captain naturally refused, but this was no simple request. You see, the Crown Prince knew all about Drake shattering the Emperor's favorite vase 6 months ago. Everyone had assumed Melissa did it. The word sent the captain into a full-blown panic mode. The boy had overheard a conversation between Drake and the Empress when he happened to be passing by. That vase was made for his father by Oswald's mother, and he wouldn't spare anyone who broke it, not even his right-hand man. And the fact that Drake tried to hide behind the Empress shocked the captain even more. After that, the captain of the knights looked at the children with pleading eyes. The little girl returned the same look. She just wanted to watch the execution from a distance. The young captain was surprised that the little princess was pleading with him so desperately. A moment later, some ladies in waiting were strolling through the courtyard when they heard footsteps and turned around, shocked to see Drake holding the children, who they knew were forbidden from leaving the palace. Oswald was grateful to him, promising to keep their secret no matter what. Around the same time, the Second Order of Knights was escorting the criminal to the execution platform. Suddenly, Our protagonist heard the Emperor's voice, wanting to know what on earth they were doing here. He clearly remembered ordering the children to stay put, so he demanded an explanation from the captain. Drake froze, breaking out in a cold sweat as he stammered for something to say. Just then, the Second Order of Knights began to cheer for the Emperor's son, His Majesty Frederick. Eleanor was startled to hear the Emperor was nearby, and she glanced in his direction. Suddenly, she spotted her daughter standing there calmly, just staring at her. Startled, Frederick immediately shielded the little one, which confused her. In that instant, a torrent of curses and insults poured from Eleanor's mouth, all directed at the girl. The woman couldn't believe the imperial family would love her after she had betrayed her own mother. Now Eleanor was certain she should have gotten rid of the ungrateful monster back then. Listening to the threats and insults, the protagonist suddenly realized the words no longer scared her. Looking at her broken and pathetic mother, Honey couldn't believe she had ever caused her so much pain. The woman's reaction was exactly why the Emperor hadn't wanted them to meet. He roared an order for the soldiers to proceed to the guillotine and get that bitch out of sight. But Eleanor suddenly collapsed, catching the knights off guard. She bit one of the soldiers' hands, screaming for them to let her go at once. The other knights dragged her away, ignoring her incessant curses at Honey. The woman cursed her own daughter, certain she too would be thrown away like trash one day. She was glad Honey could see this execution, as Eleanor felt the girl was headed for the same end. Just then, Drake stuffed a rag in her mouth, stunning everyone. Did these guys really forget how to gag a madwoman? Oswald squeezed Honey's hand, trying to let her know not to take her mother's words to heart. The girl looked at the crown prince in confusion, not knowing what to say. But she pulled herself together and stated firmly that the woman's words could no longer affect her. Eleanor watched in shock as the girl calmly bid her farewell. Honey stood there until her mother passed through the main gate and disappeared from view. As her figure grew smaller, the protagonist's emotions vanished with it. Frederick thought the Second Order of Templars should get back to training, and Drake volunteered to deliver the message. However, the Emperor felt the captain was no exception, to which he reluctantly agreed. Honey worried for him, but Oswald was calm, knowing his father was always lenient with Drake. Then, the Emperor reminded them that this was no time to be worrying about others. He was also very eager to hear the excuses of the two children who had defied his orders. Hearing that they had to prepare themselves, Honey immediately shut her eyes, thinking she was about to be hit. But Frederick walked up to her, gently ruffled her hair, and then stepped back. After telling Drake to send the children back to the palace, the Emperor headed for the gate, walking toward his execution. Honey watched him go, rubbing the spot on her head where he had touched her. Back in the palace, the children were devouring desserts, and Oswald offered her a cookie. Honey still couldn't believe any of this was really happening. It felt strange to her to have died and come back to life, and for things to be going so well. Lost in thought, she didn't even notice Oswald gently taking her hand. Snapping back to reality, Honey looked at the crown prince, hoping none of this was in vain. Seeing her distracted look, the boy decided to find out what was bothering her. It turned out she just wasn't entirely sure this wasn't all a dream. So Honey didn't want to bother Oswald, figuring she just needed to get used to it. Then, the crown prince looked at her with a determined gaze, deciding there was something she must always remember, that they were family, and that Oswald was crazy about her. Honey was surprised he called her family, but the boy was serious. So she had nothing to worry about, because none of the fears in her head would come true. Unsure if she deserved all this, the little one wondered if he really thought of her as family. The question made Oswald laugh, because they had been family since day one. But seeing her reaction, he thought maybe the word family had upset Honey. But it was the opposite. She was genuinely happy to hear him say it. Suddenly, Charles walked in, greeting the children and hoping they were resting well. The butler hoped to borrow Sir Drake for a moment, wanting to discuss something. Hearing them whispering outside, the children guessed they were probably talking about the execution. A moment later, Drake finally returned, looking very confused. It turned out the execution was over, and His Majesty would be returning to the palace any minute. From his expression, she could tell the captain was hiding something. But instead of pressing him, she decided to apologize to Sir Drake for all the trouble she had caused. The The captain smiled and knelt on one knee, sincerely asking her to just call him by his name from now on. Besides, there was no need for apologies. It was a fair trade, and now they had to keep his secret. The girl beamed, promising she wouldn't breathe a word of a secret. When the Emperor returned, the captain would be heading to the training grounds to carry sandbags. As for the children, they would have to face Frederick's wrath, but Oswald decided he would protect Honey. But the protagonist wouldn't have it, believing she needed to take responsibility with everyone else. Seeing her determination, the Crown Prince decided to offer the girl something truly useful. Drake watched in amazement as the two children whispered about something with super serious expressions. The protagonist was stunned by what she heard, but Oswald believed she was the only one who could handle it. If they did exactly as he said, their father surely wouldn't scold and punish them so harshly. Honey didn't really get the point, though, and nervously bit her lip. Just then, a lady-in-waiting appeared, inviting the children for an audience with the king. Things were moving so fast that the protagonists were caught off guard and froze on the spot. The Emperor was waiting for them in his study, glaring at the newcomers with a terrifying look. He had hoped Oswald and Honey would at least apologize for disobeying his orders. The atmosphere was heavy, and the girl swallowed hard before stepping forward first. The first thing she did was admit she just wanted to see her mother one last time. Honey believed it was the only way she could truly grasp that she was finally free from the cruelty and violence. Now it was time for the part Oswald mentioned, and the Crown Prince gestured for her to continue. The girl clasped her hands, her eyes wide, wondering if the Emperor would punish her. The tension in the air left the protagonist unable to move. Judging by Frederick's stern expression, it was clear the whole thing had backfired spectacularly. But suddenly, the Emperor decided not to scold the children, much to their surprise. Instead, he decided to punish the girl by reaching his hand out to her. Honey was completely terrified when she saw this and heard what he said. She froze again, cowering with her eyes squeezed shut, trembling as she awaited her punishment. He placed his hand on her head and ruffled her hair again, leaving her utterly bewildered. Frederick's punishment was that he would pat her on the head without warning whenever he felt like it. The Emperor also hoped the little one would get used to it soon. It was getting late, so he decided to let the children go, which immediately cheered up Oswald, Honey, and Drake. But Frederick was only referring to the children, as the captain had to stay a while longer. I mean, didn't they have something to talk about? Like, when did Drake get so bold? The captain acted like everything was fine, especially in front of Honey, but things were really not fine. He was the commander of the Knights, which made him look older and more tired than he should. So right now, the last thing he wanted to do was go train. He decided to copy Honey's look and tried batting his eyes, but for some reason, it didn't work. This annoyed the Emperor, because Drake was an adult and should know better. So Frederick ordered him to grab a sandbag and get his ass back to the training grounds. The news of Eleanor's death sent the entire palace into chaos, and Honey was glad she found out so quickly. No wonder Sir Drake had such a strange look on his face when he came back that day. The populace had killed her before the execution, stoning her to death. Her end was not so different from her previous life, when she had incurred the public's wrath for trying to poison Constance. She had been a generous empress who cared for her people, even after her husband's death. The situation now was completely different from her past life. Because Honey had revealed the abuse before Melissa was killed, society felt genuine sympathy for her. But the child knew it would all be over once her ice powers were revealed. She couldn't escape as long as people feared magic. Still, her new room was filled with new things, which meant the Imperial family genuinely cared for her. The protagonist wondered if she was really getting used to having a family. With these people by her side all the time, she was starting to feel hopeful again, even though she knew she shouldn't. That's why she felt so guilty about hiding her powers from everyone. After all, Frederick did send her that music box and secretly funded the ice castle she lived in. Honey decided to just tell him the truth, expecting either help or some kind of consequence. But none of it mattered anymore. The girl was ready for whatever came next. The next morning, she enjoyed a peaceful breakfast with Oswald in the royal dining room. Honey thought that, at the end of the day, her powers could actually be useful to Frederick as the emperor, but the protagonist had no idea how to prove she was useful. Seeing the girl's face fall, Oswald curiously asked her what was wrong. She just smiled back, amazed at how the boy could pick up on every little change. After breakfast, the crown prince went to his lessons, promising to come see the princess later. Waving goodbye, the protagonist decided this was no time to slack off. While Oswald was busy, she had to come up with her own training method too. Suddenly, she overheard the servants talking, discussing how spring was almost here, because it meant they wouldn't be able to enjoy shaved ice for a while. On their salary, they could only dream of such a treat during the warmer months, unless the imperial family provided it for them. Viola, who was with the child, was surprised to see her suddenly freeze. But the girl had finally seen the opportunity she had been waiting for. That day, she took her ladies-in-waiting by surprise. Her sudden decision made the girl's first thought, "Oh God, what did we do wrong?" One of the maids tried to explain that if the young lady needed anything, she could always ask them. But the girl just insisted she could take a bath by herself. The protagonist eventually convinced the servants she was no longer a baby and finally got her way. The maids decided to wait outside for the princess in case she needed anything. Finally alone, Honey walked to the center of the bathroom and prepared herself. She focused her mind and began to wave her hands, releasing a cold energy with the incantation. She conjured an ice crystal in the air, which radiated a biting chill. The little one realized that her abilities in this life were at the same level as in her previous one. She felt it would be best to demonstrate her skills, to prove that she was useful. The problem was, she was too young to wield her magic as skillfully as before. It seemed our little girl would have to wait for her magical power to recover before visiting His Majesty. Still, she was happy to remember the feeling of using her abilities. Afterwards, she took a bath and came out unharmed to the maids waiting at the door. As the maids helped dry her off, they thought it was cute that she wanted to bathe by herself. But after 10 days, her insistence on bathing alone began to frighten them. During this time, Honey went to wash up by herself every single time. The maids guessed that the child probably just didn't want anyone to see the wounds on her body. They were certain Her Highness needed time to recover from her terrible past. So they patiently waited outside the door each time, while the little one practiced her ice magic inside. By the 10th day, she could easily control the ice, making it obey her will completely. Now that everything was ready, all that was left was to tell the Emperor. In her heart, she hoped Frederick would pat her head again and mess up her hair a little. But Honey also knew that if things didn't go well, she would have to use her powers to escape, because the princess had made up her mind that she would never return to that snowy mountain. Eventually, she arrived at the Emperor's chambers, guarded by Drake and his men. The captain was quite shocked to see the little girl strolling along by herself. He calmly smiled at her, immediately guessing that the princess had come to see His Majesty. As it turned out, however, she had something very important to tell the Emperor. Suddenly, Honey noticed one of the knights guarding the entrance staring at her. The knight, thinking a smile would reassure the child, ended up forcing a goofy grin that startled her. Frightened by the sight, Honey thought His Majesty might be too busy to see her. But Drake was sure he wasn't that busy and ordered Scott to inform Frederick of the princess's arrival. Scott was the knight who had smiled at her. Did he not realize how scary he looked? Finally, she stood before the door to the Emperor's office, hesitated for a moment, and then knocked awkwardly. After receiving permission to enter, she decisively opened the door and saw Frederick buried behind a pile of documents. Remembering Drake's words and seeing the mountain of paperwork on Frederick's desk, the little one decided to come back another day. But the Emperor said, "Don't worry, little sister. I'll be done soon." No matter how busy he was, Frederick couldn't neglect his little sister when she came to visit. First, he invited her to sit at a table laden with sweets and a pot of tea. The Emperor was eager to hear what his sister wanted to talk about, but she suddenly stood up from the table, knelt on the floor, and gave him a deep bow. Her big request was to ask His Majesty to let her stay in the imperial palace. Frederick was shocked by the request, feeling she didn't need to ask at all. It was a given. Of course she could stay, as the Emperor was her brother. But Honey knew she had yet to reveal a crucial detail. Once he heard it, he might change his mind about letting her stay. Mustering her courage, the princess confessed that she possessed the power of ice. For a moment, the Emperor just stood there silently, gazing at the girl. Honey wasn't sure if she should run now or wait a little longer. Frederick understood why his words had failed to reassure the heroine. He wondered if Eleanor knew about her ability, but she shook her head, because now only 2 people knew about Honey's ability, and they were both here. The heroine knew she could have kept this secret forever, but she didn't want to repay the Emperor's kindness that way. Frederick was completely unfazed by this, and more importantly, he was ready to help his sister. The girl looked at him in confusion, not understanding how he could accept it so calmly. In turn, Frederick didn't understand the look of distrust on her face. He knew it was risky to keep a power that terrified the entire empire within the palace walls. But Frederick was beginning to see that Honey wasn't the kind of child who would abuse her powers. I mean, if she wanted to, she would have done it already, right? The first to suffer would have been Eleanor, and then surely the maids. But as it turned out, it was Honey herself who was covered in wounds from being constantly beaten. The Emperor knew he could never forget that, so he chose to trust the girl, only hoping he had made the right decision. Then, he smiled and knelt beside the princess, holding out his hand. Although the girl had prepared for the worst, she was overjoyed that the Emperor believed her. Remembering that she should give thanks in this situation, Honey sincerely thanked His Majesty. Frederick, too, was grateful for the child's extraordinary courage. Then he ruffled her hair, which made her happy for the rest of the day. It turned out the Emperor had realized she had complete control over her abilities. She knew it was best to show him, but they needed a place where they wouldn't mind things getting wet. So Frederick suggested they go to the bathroom. It was right next to the office. Honey was stunned, never imagining he would be so busy as to need a private bathroom in his office. Once there, the little one took a few steps back and got ready. She took a deep breath, concentrated her magic in her hands, and summoned an ice crystal. Then she made the ice rise, while Frederick watched calmly from the side. Right before his eyes, Honey began to shape the ice, from geometric figures to a bust of Oswald. Yes, the Emperor had heard she was skilled with her powers, but this was much better than he had imagined. At the same time, he knew that no secret could be hidden forever in this world. So Frederick wanted to suggest she use her ability for good, and Honey actually already had an idea for that. She thought she could make ice and sell it, using the money she earned to help people in need. The Emperor knew the main problem with selling ice was preventing it from melting. But if Honey used her powers properly, the ice would be virtually undamaged, making transportation easier and improving people's lives. Even if they discovered her magic, no one would blame her for it. She was very excited when her plan was approved, but when he heard she was going to give him the money left over after helping others, Frederick was stunned. He couldn't help but laugh, telling his little sister she didn't need to try to pay him. I mean, come on, she was at an age where she should be taking things for granted. The Emperor decided she could keep the rest of the money, but hoped she would donate some to charity. He believed that the good deeds Honey did would one day become a force to protect her. And with that, the little girl decided to take her leave and bid His Majesty farewell. Suddenly, a shiny bracelet slipped out of the child's dress, leaving Frederick completely stunned. Realizing he had seen it and was picking it up, our little girl began to panic intensely. The bracelet was ordinary, and the Emperor didn't understand why she kept it in her pocket instead of wearing it. Then it suddenly dawned on him. It was her escape fund, in case she needed to run away. Honey had to admit that she planned to escape if things didn't go well, and the bracelet was to be sold for money. The girl was too scared to look up at His Majesty, but he unexpectedly burst out laughing like a madman. Frederick roared with laughter because out of all the jewelry in Honey's room, she had picked that cheap little bracelet. Seeing the heroine's face turn red as a tomato made him laugh even harder. He finally managed to stop laughing, said he understood, and promised not to tease her anymore. Now she could go back, especially since Oswald was probably looking for her anxiously. Honey gave a farewell curtsy, sincerely thanking His Majesty for his kindness. Watching the little girl leave, Frederick suddenly thought of someone. As the Emperor had thought, this person would be perfect for the job. Stepping outside, the heroine let out a huge sigh of relief that everything had gone so well. Suddenly, Scott called out to her. He approached the princess, bowed, and introduced himself. He stated his name and said he was a member of the Knightly Order. Honey recognized him immediately. That unforgettable smile still sent a shiver down her spine. Scott felt that his behavior back then might have been a bit inappropriate. She had looked worried, so he wanted to help, but yes, he had overdone it. So now Scott was begging Her Highness the Princess to forgive his actions. He prostrated himself on the ground, ready to accept any punishment the princess deemed he deserved. Honey tried to calm him down, knowing the guy had only done it because he was worried about her. But Scott wouldn't accept it. He couldn't accept such kindness, because that's how it should be between a master and a knight. At least that's what the captain always taught him. Speak of the devil, Drake appeared right at that moment. The captain told Scott to shut up and apologize to the heroine for his behavior. Honey interjected, explaining that the noble knight had only approached her out of concern. So Drake was happy to introduce a knight who, despite his youth, was already the second strongest in the order. Honey and Scott smiled and promised they would definitely look out for each other. The knight felt a bit embarrassed by the captain's praise of his skills. He resolved to work even harder to become an excellent warrior in service of Her Highness. Watching them, the girl dreamed that everyone could be as kind to her as Frederick was. Frederick had a half-brother, Christopher, who had flatly refused the title of Grand Duke and ended up just being a duke. Considering he owned the Herne Mountains, you couldn't find a more suitable person for ice production. Later, the Emperor called the little girl over to introduce her to Christopher. Honey hadn't touched the pastries last time, but this time she couldn't resist, and they were delicious. The Duke was definitely the perfect person for this business. But the question was, would he acknowledge Honey? Of all the royal family members, he hated Eleanor the most, which meant he also hated her child. Suddenly, the door was thrown open, and there stood Christopher. But the Duke's disheveled appearance completely took Honey by surprise. In Honey's memory, he was always a neat, dignified man in glasses and an old-fashioned tailcoat. Without his glasses, he didn't even see the little one, just walked past her, let out a weary groan, and plopped down on the sofa next to his brother. Christopher was glad to finally be able to relax. Frederick thought he had a lot of nerve, but his brother had been traveling non-stop for 4 whole days on the Emperor's orders. The Duke was completely confused. He didn't understand what could be so urgent. It turned out there was an excellent investment opportunity, and Frederick wanted his brother to get back into the business world. Seeing Christopher's shocked expression, the Emperor clarified that he was talking about the ice business. The Duke was stunned, thinking some new ice storage technology had emerged in his absence. But even with Frederick's guarantee of success, Christopher couldn't figure out what the rush was. Just then, Honey couldn't help but explain that the Emperor was talking about her ability. Hearing an unfamiliar voice, the Duke tensed up and reached for his glasses. Through the lenses, he saw Honey, Eleanor's daughter, sitting across from him. He flew into a rage, not understanding what ability they were talking about or why this brat was here. Frederick introduced her as his brother's future business partner and wanted her to demonstrate her ability. Since Honey's ability to create ice was quite dangerous, the Emperor wanted to give her a slightly different job. Hearing about some ability again, Christopher was completely lost. Frederick wanted his little sister to maintain the temperature and integrity of the ice for a long time. With the command to act, the princess began to concentrate magic in her hands, and then, before the shocked Duke, she conjured a pile of ice orbs in midair. She held them up as if on a platter and immediately presented them to the Emperor. It was concentrated cold air that could help ice makers keep ice frozen for longer. Christopher was stunned by what he saw. Realizing it was truly the power of ice, he had to admit that with such an ability, the ice business was destined to succeed. But the Duke wanted nothing to do with that woman's daughter. So the Emperor decided to tell him some news. If the Duke was truly not interested, the girl didn't want Frederick to force the issue. However, the Emperor decided to give it a try, knowing things were about to get interesting. First, he explained to his brother that the woman had been dead for a long time. After that, he told Christopher everything that had happened and all about Honey. After hearing the story, Christopher slammed his fist on the table, sending cups and plates of pastries flying. With tears streaming down his face, filled with anger and frustration, he said, "How much longer is this crap going to continue?" The heroine had heard that the Duke was a cold-blooded man who wouldn't even blink if someone died in front of him. But seeing him cry like that, the girl realized once again that you can't always believe rumors. Despite his stern appearance, the Emperor said Frederick was full of compassion. After he finished crying, Christopher took the contract from his brother's outstretched hand. Looking at the cups and saucers scattered on the floor, the heroine was relieved that nothing had broken. It was only then that she understood why the Emperor had reacted so strongly to the bracelet that was probably cheaper than this tea set. After carefully examining every clause, Christopher decided everything was in order. So Frederick told him to empty a palace in a few days, which left the Duke completely baffled. It turned out the Emperor planned to give it to Princess Honey, as she didn't have her own palace yet. The little girl felt it was unnecessary, as she could just stay in her original palace. But Christopher insisted, and according to the contract, he was supposed to visit the heroine regularly. So the little one relented, which flustered the Duke a bit. With that settled, the Emperor now intended to dispose of everything in her old palace. Honey was fine with that, but there was one thing she wanted to keep. After getting permission, she immediately ran to the palace to retrieve it as quickly as possible. As punishment for his rudeness, Frederick sent his brother to follow the little one and be her porter. Christopher agreed and went outside, finding the heroine near the fountain. The girl walked along the path toward the gate, with the Duke following close behind. They didn't say a word the whole way, and the girl didn't seem to notice he was there. When they reached the palace where she used to live with her mother, Honey paused for a moment. Christopher was surveying the area around the castle, a place he hadn't seen in about 10 years. Once inside, she headed straight for the door to her old room. It was a complete mess inside, with broken furniture and trash scattered everywhere. Seeing the chaos in the room, Christopher wondered if they could find anything in this dump. But then, the girl started picking up a broken music box from the floor, which left the Duke completely stunned. He had once thrown a fit over Frederick's decision to give that thing to that woman's daughter. But the Emperor had just wanted to buy a gift for his little sister, who was the same age as Oswald. And so, she carefully gathered the broken remains of the music box, looking at them with a sad expression. Unable to hold it in any longer, Christopher burst into tears again, completely exposing himself in front of Honey. She had no idea the Duke had decided to show up here as well. He admitted he had come at his brother's request and was puzzled by the princess's precious little gadget. Seeing that the music box was broken, he thought it was dangerous for a small child to hold, but the girl insisted on keeping it. However, what the Duke meant was that he wanted her to give him the box. Surprised by this request, she slowly walked toward him and reluctantly handed it over. The journey back to the palace was just as quiet as before. Suddenly, Christopher stopped and turned to the young princess, completely catching her off guard. The Duke confessed that he had genuinely hated her all this time, all because she was Eleanor's daughter. Considering what kind of woman she was, he couldn't imagine anything good, but then he realized everything the girl had been through. Christopher only believed what he saw, and as a result, he ended up hating an innocent person. The protagonist knew it was too late to say this now, but he decided to say it anyway. He bowed and apologized for his prejudice against Honey all this time. He was sincerely sorry for all the pain he had caused her. With his previous behavior, he certainly didn't dare expect her to accept his apology immediately. But Christopher intended to prove his sincerity with his actions and earn the right to be forgiven. Seeing his frankness, the protagonist decided not to remain silent and told him everything. She knew the reason for his hatred and thought there was still nothing she could do about it. It was hurtful and unfair, as no one can choose where they come from. Nevertheless, Honey sincerely thanked the protagonist for being the first to apologize. She believed he was sincere, so she accepted readily, which caught Christopher completely off guard. But the princess had no doubt, because he himself had promised to prove everything with his actions. So the protagonist hoped the Duke would keep his promise. Looking at her innocent smile, Christopher started slapping himself, feeling like a total scumbag. Honey tried to stop him, as her hands were cut from the broken jewelry box, and they needed to hurry. The Duke agreed, wrapped an arm around the girl's waist, lifted her up, and calmly walked back. The heroine was flustered, once again convinced that you can't trust rumors. Meanwhile, in Christopher's palace, the atmosphere was filled with the hustle and bustle of daily life. Before long, the Duke walked through the front door, still carrying the child in his arms. A servant named Maverly was very surprised to see his master back from the Emperor's so soon. The maids were also happy to have their boss home and were very curious about the outcome of the meeting with the royal family. Then, they suddenly noticed Christopher carrying a little girl like a sack of potatoes. Both the maids and Maverly were stunned that he was dragging the princess around like an object. They knew the poor child must be uncomfortable and was probably too scared to say anything to the grumpy Duke. But Christopher didn't think it was a big deal, as he used to carry Oswald like this, and he never complained. Realizing that Honey might actually be hurt, he apologized to the little girl for his rough treatment. The maids also apologized, feeling the poor child must have suffered from the Duke's clumsiness. But the princess began to defend the protagonist, saying he had brought her here very quickly. One of the maids took a candy from her pocket and offered it to the little girl with a big smile. It was a handmade candy from a famous dessert shop, and it tasted wonderful. Just then, the heroine felt a strange flutter in her heart, and she had no idea why. After the little girl gratefully accepted the candy, the maid introduced herself as Gerda. Suddenly, Gerda and the others were startled when they saw the cuts on Honey's hands. Noticing their confused gazes, the Duke explained that the heroine had been cut by a broken box. The servants were greatly relieved that their worries about their master had not come true. Christopher ordered them to fetch the royal physician at once. While waiting for the doctor, the protagonist decided to take the young princess to the living room. Gerda and Maverly were told to follow them, while the other servants could go back to work. The staff wondered if their master had dismissed them a bit too harshly. The Duke might have waved his hand, ordering them to bring refreshments to the living room for him and the girl to enjoy. Following behind Christopher, Honey glanced back once to wave at the maids she had left behind. The maids were openly captivated by her adorable appearance. They were surprised that, even though the child looked exactly like Eleanor, she had a completely different aura. Since the master had brought her personally, they all wanted to do their best for the little one. A few minutes later, the royal physician arrived in the living room. Honey had expected to see Agnes, but a serious-looking man carrying a briefcase walked in instead. His name was August, and his presence made the heroine feel uneasy. After the examination, he concluded that the princess just needed to have her fever reduced slightly. August was angry, not understanding why a brilliant physician like him had to waste his time in this backwater place. He used to treat the emperor himself, and now he was sent to deal with a poor, powerless princess. As he was speaking so bluntly, his gaze fell upon the Duke, whom he recognized at once. Just then, the doctor's attitude did a complete 180, and he began to fawn over the male lead with excessive flattery. August felt there was no need to waste time on an insignificant child, and that it would be better to examine the Duke first. He immediately spotted a small cut on Christopher's cheek and was eager to treat it. As for the little one, the doctor thought her injuries could wait. Hearing this, the servants were stunned, thinking the number of court physicians was about to be reduced by one. They just hoped their master wouldn't get too angry, lest he scare Honey. Christopher gave an order, and two servants approached the completely frozen August. They moved quickly, pinning the terrified doctor to the ground. For a moment, August couldn't understand why the Duke was suddenly doing this to him. Christopher was surprised that Auguste was surprised, since he was always neglecting the princess. The healer tried to defend himself, saying that the male lead himself used to think the child was a troublemaker. But even if the Duke hated her, did that erase the princess's royal status? How dare the healer look down on a member of the royal family? But Christopher didn't deny that in the past, he did indeed hate Honey. And now, as August could clearly see, everything was the complete opposite. This meant the male lead would no longer allow a scoundrel like him to neglect and belittle the princess. He intended to report the entire matter to the emperor himself, while August awaited his punishment. The servants dragged the man into the hallway, and his screams continued for some time. Gerda thought to herself that if she had known this was an option, she would have just asked for some medicine. Honey, on the other hand, was completely calm, having long been accustomed to such things. Christopher was startled by her words and stared at the child, dumbfounded. He sat down across from her, determined never to hear her say such a thing again. The Duke would always be by her side to help her, so he hoped that if anything happened, Honey would come directly to him. As he began to treat her wound, the male lead suddenly noticed how thin the little girl was. It turned out she was actually chubbier than before, which greatly surprised Christopher. After he finished bandaging her up, Maverly curiously asked where the scar on the master's face came from. To the servant's surprise, the Duke had inflicted the wound by slapping himself. He did it to punish himself for being so rude to Honey. At that moment, Maverly and Gerda recalled all the chaotic things their master had done in the past. They were actually glad he had finally grown up and started thinking normally. Christopher sighed, wondering how their attitudes would change if their master were suddenly replaced. Hearing about a new master, Maverly was so shocked his jaw nearly hit the floor. The male lead excitedly pointed to Honey, introducing their new mistress, a matter already confirmed by the Emperor. He hoped the servants would care for her with the same love and concern they showed him. Gerda and Maverly jumped for joy, as life in the palace was about to get much more interesting. When the heroine's moving day finally arrived, the servants in her old room were busy packing and cleaning. According to Viola, August was arrested for corruption and sent to a prison in some remote region. She also dressed up the princess, putting the little one in a super gorgeous and shiny dress. While Honey was nervously wondering how to greet her new servants today, Oswald was pouting off to the side, looking unhappy. He felt the girl didn't need to go to another palace and leave him all alone. Honey was grateful for him saying that, but there was nothing she could do now, and her luggage was almost packed anyway. Just then, the child made her promise that they would visit each other every day. It was time to go, and Christopher came in to get the little one. Honey nodded, and Oswald chimed in that he really wanted to go with them. But the Duke knew the boy had classes today and just smiled silently. He didn't have the energy to argue, especially since Honey would start comforting Oswald if he forbade it. As they approached the heroine's new palace, Christopher's expression went completely blank with surprise. He grinned and covered his face, thinking that someone clearly couldn't hold back. They walked a little further, and he covered the little girl's eyes with his hand. When she suddenly smelled a sweet scent, they had reached the entrance, and the Duke wanted Honey to take a good look at what she was about to see. He moved his hand, revealing a crowd of servants throwing a party to celebrate her arrival. The heroine was stunned by the colorful decorations and the endless stream of compliments. As they walked through the corridor formed by the staff, joyous greetings rang out from all sides. Seeing the shock on Honey's face, Gerda felt that the young lady wasn't ready for this level of craziness. Hearing this, even the usually serious Duke felt quite embarrassed. Just then, the chef came out of the palace, pushing a cart with a 3-tiered cake. He had made it himself. Oswald was deeply moved by the elegance and beauty of this dessert masterpiece. Unlike him, Honey looked at the huge cake with eyes full of fear and shock. The heroine had never experienced anything like this before and felt she didn't even need it. But at this moment, her heart was pounding in a way it never had before. Oswald smiled and said that Honey was the star of the day, so she should enjoy it all. As she reached out to take his hand, the girl realized she was truly no longer alone. She felt that not only was the cake wonderful, but everything they had planned for her today was wonderful. Honey shed tears of joy, feeling like this was her real birthday. These words made Maverly choke up as well, and Gerda also felt that this was the best day for them too. Hearing the suggestion to blow out the candles, the little one was at a loss, as she had never done it before. In that moment, Christopher realized that no one had ever thrown a party for her. So the Duke decided to go all out and prepare a banquet for her birthday celebration. First, the heroine shared the chef's signature cake with everyone present. Feeling the atmosphere and tasting the cake, Oswald decided he could safely entrust Honey to them. Christopher froze, finding it strange to hear such words about his aunt from his nephew. The male lead hoped the princess had no worries and was just enjoying the day. The girl nodded, indicating that she was truly enjoying it all, her heart filled with gratitude. Honey didn't even know why, but she really liked the people here. Since Christopher had known them since he was her age, he could guarantee they were trustworthy. After a pause, the Duke decided he couldn't just leave that music box broken. Hearing that he was going to fix it, the heroine was very surprised, thinking it was impossible. But the Duke said they had hired the most skilled craftsmen in the Empire. They could handle the job. Honey gazed at the male lead, knowing she would be able to hear that beautiful music box melody again. Later, Oswald decided to stay the night, and the two of them slept on opposite sides of the bed. Lying in bed, the girl remembered receiving that music box as a gift 2 years ago. The reason she had survived until now was that Honey had always kept it well hidden from her mother. But one time, the girl forgot to hide it, and tragedy struck. Somehow, she had managed to start over, so it seemed there was no reason to stay on guard anymore. However, Looking at the now sleeping Oswald, Honey decided she would never let her guard down again. She moved closer to him and took his hand, determined to protect herself and her family. Unlike her last family, these people had taught her a whole new way of expressing love. And Oswald was the first person to make Honey feel this way. She was determined to protect him to the end, and the little one fell asleep holding the boy's hand. The next morning, a pair of gentle, girlish hands lightly touched Honey, trying to wake her. Opening her eyes, the little girl saw Viola's happy face smiling down at her. Honey was surprised, but it turned out the maid couldn't leave without saying good morning to her mistress. The reason Viola wasn't there yesterday was that she was processing her transfer, which surprised the princess. The little one couldn't understand. Was an emperor's maid, basically second in command, really going to work here? Viola decided to reintroduce herself, announcing that from that day on, she would be the princess's exclusive maid. At yesterday's celebration, the heroine had looked for the girl, not wanting to leave without saying goodbye. Of course, Honey thought it was wonderful to be able to stay with her, but she still found it strange that His Majesty's maid would be involved with an ordinary princess. Viola countered that she considered this position very suitable for her work. Admiring the child's cute, confused face, she caught a glimpse of a sleepy Oswald behind her. The cuteness level was off the charts, and she could barely stop herself from rushing over to hug them. Instead, she recalled how, a few months ago, she was the first to see Honey's injuries. When Viola learned that the girl had endured everything in silence without a single complaint, her heart ached. Seeing the child curled up and observing everything, she began to worry. A few days later, Honey shyly smiled and thanked her for the first time. It was then that Viola truly realized how kind the princess was. Right then and there, the maid wanted to get to know her mistress better and decided to join her. The princess held back her tears, hoping Viola would stay with her forever. Just then, Oswald finally woke up, heard the conversation, and lunged over to give them a big hug. The maid remembered why she had woken the child. Empress Melissa would be arriving soon. Her visit this time was solely to have clothes tailored for Honey, and she had brought a tailor with her. The girl was taken aback and looked at Viola in confusion. It turned out that besides Melissa and the tailor Drake, Christopher and Prince Frederick had also come. The Duke had just heard something was happening and thought he'd tag along. The Emperor had nothing urgent today, and the captain of the guard was just escorting him. The Empress had always wanted to do this if she had a daughter, but she never expected it to be like this. The girl was sure she had taken enough last time, but Melissa didn't think so. Besides, the Empress wanted to give the princess a proper housewarming gift. Judging by the number of outfits, Honey felt like they had brought the entire store. Frederick was surprised his wife wanted the little one to try on all these clothes, but she didn't think it was a big deal. As the fashion show began, the princess modeled each outfit for the three men, who couldn't decide which one looked best. One of the dresses was made of a special silk that was much softer than all the others. Since it was for a child, the Empress had made sure it was super comfortable. By the end of the fitting session, our girl was exhausted after trying on dozens of outfits. To her surprise, Melissa intended to buy everything they had chosen. Realizing it was time to pay, Frederick, Christopher, and Drake all pulled out their checks at the same time. But it turned out the Empress had already paid for everything, leaving the men speechless. She ordered them to sign a check every time Honey put on a new dress. The Empress hugged the girl and asked if the princess had a hard day. Honey didn't understand why she was so tired when all she did was sit around all day. Oswald promised to come over as soon as his classes were done, but for now, they carried her back to her room and she fell asleep instantly. News of how wonderful the heroine's life was in her new place spread like wildfire from her former palace. No matter what a she-devil Eleanor was, her daughter was the sweetest princess in history. Some now sympathized with Honey because she was still a child but wondered what she would be like when she grew up. The maids in the girls' palace were delighted that Christopher had been showing up more often since she arrived. Just then, while taking a walk in the palace courtyard, our girl spotted the Duke. She immediately ran to greet him, but he told her it wasn't safe to run like that. It turned out she knew he was coming beforehand and had come here as quickly as possible to see him. Christopher looked over her dress and then suddenly started taking off his cloak. He wrapped it around her, thinking it was cold outside and she could easily catch a cold. Dressed like this, she tried to argue that she wouldn't get sick because of her ability, but the Duke wasn't buying it. Afterward, he casually lifted her into his arms and walked towards the palace. When they found Frederick, he and the Emperor started arguing over the child's hairstyle. The Duke was shocked at his brother's terrible taste in picking a suitable hairstyle. The main reason for their meeting was to prepare for the launch of the ice-making business. The project would operate under the name Hearn Peak, so they needed to lock down the market in each region. The technical problem that Honey solved with her ability couldn't be hidden. The Emperor was terrified when he heard they had to release a statement. The Duke was about to announce that they had solved the storage problem, but that was top secret. Just then, he helped the girl with her hair, arranging it beautifully. He handed all the documents, equipment logistics, and the entire budget breakdown to Frederick. Looking at them, Honey felt that the male leads weren't scared or disgusted by her ability. They were surprised. Did she expect them to be afraid of her? Hearing this, the heroine immediately shook her head, because that wasn't it at all. The male leads were completely calm, thinking there was absolutely no reason to be afraid. But Frederick admitted that for a moment, he was indeed scared, simply because the girl possessed magic. Now that they were all being honest, he also confessed that Oswald possessed an ability as well. Hearing this, Honey froze for a few seconds, processing the information she had just received. Coming to her senses, she stared at the Emperor with her mouth agape and blurted out what? Frederick walked over and patted her head, trying to calm her down a bit. At first, the Emperor thought it was just a coincidence that the child had insight, but over time, it became clear that the Crown Prince possessed some kind of precognitive ability. It was the power of the God of Light, which left our girl utterly confused again. For her past life's memories, she already knew this was the main god of the entire empire. He symbolized light and the sun, and also possessed the abilities of prophecy and foresight. Although Oswald's ability wasn't always active and he couldn't control it, it was already a great help. The heroine also knew that the Crown Prince wasn't the only one with this ability, but the time wasn't right. Now she realized it wasn't a hallucination at all. The child could really see through her. Who knows? Maybe it wasn't a coincidence that he appeared in that hallway that day and saw the maids dragging her. The bastard Honey hated most was pouring his love onto someone else. But if that person was truly Oswald, then the child known as Light was actually loved by Light itself. The heroine wondered how many other people knew about the Crown Prince's ability. As it turned out, almost the entire imperial family knew, plus 5 other people, including the High Priest. Then the girl wondered, could she tell the boy about her ability now? Frederick knew it could be tricky, and it was best to put it on hold for now, because as he said before, the fewer people who knew about the princess's ability, the safer it was. Honey understood his concern and apologized, feeling she had said something foolish. Later, as Christopher and the heroine were leaving the palace, he noticed she looked downcast. So, he very casually mentioned that the princess would be starting her lessons soon. The child was surprised, but the Duke knew that now that she was used to the palace, it was time to start studying. It was then that she realized how perceptive the Duke was, because studying was Honey's biggest dream. The problem was, the little one was so cautious that Christopher hadn't noticed until now. If she just sat around being jealous, nothing would change. And he wasn't bluffing when he said he would help her before. Then, the child gave him a sincere smile, thanking Christopher for seeing through her. After taking Honey back to her palace, the Duke returned to the Emperor, interrupting his work. The Duke looked genuinely surprised and scared, which in turn surprised Frederick. The Emperor thought his brother had forgotten something, but it turned out to be about the princess. The Duke thought to himself, we have to find her a tutor as soon as possible. He told the Emperor about their little talk and how he tried to cheer her up. But Fred felt it was too early for her to start studying, even though he himself had started reading at a young age. The thing was, when he found out she wanted to learn herself, Fred's attitude did a 180. First, he needed to know if there were any candidates. Christopher suggested 2 names, and the Emperor chose Lord Harvard. He seemed more loyal. Once it was settled, Fred personally wrote a letter inviting him over. Meanwhile, the ice-making business was booming, and word began to spread. So one day, Christopher overheard Oswald wondering if Honey was entering puberty. The girl was completely caught off guard, and the Duke almost burst out laughing. Honey turned around, hoping he would help, but the Duke could barely contain his laughter. It turned out the boy had recently seen these words in a book and decided to find out what they meant. The book said that teenagers try to bathe by themselves, and the little one was practicing her magic, doing just that. So, Christopher put on a thoughtful expression and guessed yes. Perhaps it was puberty. Seeing the girl's expression, he began to pray that she would get the joke. Then, our male lead decided to explain to the crown prince that the princess just needed time to adjust to her new environment. That's why she was acting that way, and the child just nodded, indicating he understood. Oswald wasn't the type to be fooled by a few words, but it seemed Christopher had succeeded. Looking ahead, the Duke realized with horror that it seemed everyone had already arrived. The children realized they were late and started to hurry everyone along. They were on their way to a family dinner, a first for Princess Honey. Walking into the dining room, the Duke apologized for being a little late. He also made a special apology to the Empress Dowager, Constance. In response, she smiled and asked Princess Honey to sit next to her. The little one accepted the invitation, realizing this was the first time she had seen Her Majesty since coming to the palace. Melissa was very surprised by Oswald's hairstyle, which Christopher had done for him. Now that everyone was here, it was time to begin, and soon the table was filled with culinary masterpieces. Just looking at the dishes dazzled the heroine, and her inner hungry appetite was awakened. Constance suggested Honey try the salmon first, saying it was very tender. The princess put a piece of fish in her mouth, and her eyes sparkled with pure delight. The Empress was glad the little one enjoyed the dish's unique flavor. Immediately after, she served her more food, while the Duke watched them like a hawk. He was completely at a loss, wondering when his mother had become so caring. He and his older brother had never enjoyed such treatment when they were young. Their mother always thought they could handle everything on their own. Constance couldn't believe that a grown man could be jealous of his little sister. Frederick grinned, realizing his younger brother was just craving their mother's attention and didn't want to share it. So, the Emperor decided to take care of his younger brother himself. He secretly placed a piece of salmon on his plate and then started patting Christopher's head, telling him to chew a few more times. Frederick tried desperately not to laugh, but he was already cracking up on the inside. The funniest part was Christopher's expression. He was completely dumbfounded by the whole thing. Seeing the hero's blank expression, the Emperor and everyone else burst out laughing. After finishing the fish, he felt that Frederick could have some fun, but not go too far. A few minutes later, Constance remembered that the princess was currently looking for a teacher. The Empress felt a little bad that the child was so eager to dive into her studies. However, she was confident that the heroine could handle any challenge. Constance believed that great potential lay in Honey's small hands and that she could become anything she wanted to be. That's why she wanted the girl to ignore others, follow her heart, and take her time. There is a time for everything. Even after the family dinner ended, the girl still remembered these words. She looked at her palm and smiled. To be honest, she had really enjoyed the gathering and was sad that it was over. Since moving day, the heroine had really come to love the atmosphere of everyone hanging out together. The Duke felt there was no need to dwell on it, as there would be many more nights like this in the future. Besides, once the princess saw what was waiting for her at the palace, she would be thrilled that things had ended early. It was something she had been looking forward to. After a moment of thought, Honey stared at our hero, completely stunned. She had thought it would take a long time to repair the music box, but thanks to his natural charm and vast financial resources, the Duke had worked his magic. They hurried back to the palace, where Christopher handed the heroine a small box. Opening it, she saw that the music box was completely repaired. Happy memories flashed before the little girl's eyes, making them sparkle. For a few minutes, Honey was captivated by the gift. She had never dreamed she would see it repaired again. The heroine picked it up with her hands, carefully examining the box from every angle. The broken glass parts had been replaced, and it now looked brand new. With the music playing, the girl lay down beside it, a gentle smile on her face, truly enjoying life. Later, as she was leaving her class, she unexpectedly ran into Christopher. He greeted her back and learned that the teacher was so energetic that she had to work twice as hard too. Usually, Harvard wasn't that active, but it seemed seeing our girl here had given him some motivation. It turned out that today was the first time the Duke had gone out in 3 days. To Honey's surprise, the reason the Duke had been so busy was because of Oswald. The boy wanted to take the princess for a tour of the city, so Christopher had been trying to keep himself busy. But now he wanted to know if the little one would agree to a walk. The girl's eyes lit up, and she happily agreed, realizing she would be leaving the palace gates for the first time. The trip was planned for the next day, as the Duke needed a little time to recover. All right, it was time to focus on work. Honey had to quickly create about 20 pieces of condensed air. After so much training, the way she created those ice particles in the air had become more effortless and stylish. She scooped them into a bag and handed it to the Duke. No problem. Christopher thanked her and noted that Honey was getting more and more skilled at this. Perhaps all the talk about puberty had an effect because the child just raised an eyebrow and smirked. In any case, she did an excellent job, as usual. The next day, the three of them, dressed in commoners' plain clothes, got ready to hit the road. Oswald marveled at how Honey was still incredibly cute even in these shabby clothes. The outfit made her feel like she was really going on an outing, and her heart pounded in her chest. She glanced at the Duke and was surprised to see a huge sword hanging from his waist. As it turned out, the guy wasn't very skilled with it, but carried it just in case. In any case, relying on Christopher for this sort of thing wasn't the best idea, as he only knew the basics. Father had once told Oswald that his uncle was much stronger in martial arts than in swordsmanship. Looking at the Duke, Honey realized that you couldn't get a physique like that without rigorous training. On top of that, the previous emperor had usurped the throne, which angered a large number of powerful nobles, turning them into political enemies. So yes, the childhood of his two eldest sons was anything but smooth. After a while, the group finally arrived at the capital's main commercial street. From the goods to the crowds, the heroine was overwhelmed by everything around her. First, Christopher laid down the rules for the children. No wandering off alone and no going with strangers. He made them repeat it over and over until they could recite it in their sleep. A few minutes later, the children were finally free, breathing a sigh of relief. They started walking down the street, their eyes darting everywhere. First, Honey was stunned by the variety of fruits at the street stalls. She was also impressed by the types of fish and the way they used the ice she had made. The atmosphere here was completely different from the palace, and the girl loved it. Seeing a corn dog vendor on the side, Oswald wondered what on earth that was. Christopher had no idea himself and suggested the children use the money he gave them to try it. The vendor was delighted to see such cute customers and told them the price. They took out their small purses and quickly did the math. The lady specially picked the biggest, tastiest corn dogs with the most sauce for the little ones. The children were completely captivated by this mysterious snack that gave off a fatally meaty aroma. As it turned out, the thing was deadly delicious, like every cell in their bodies was having a party. After trying more street food, the children were shocked to find they had already spent all their money. As they continued to stroll down the market street, one of the shops caught Honey's eye. It was a jewelry store, and one item in particular stood out. It was a set of 3 bracelets with a profound name. Give your unchanging heart to the one you cherish. Knowing the children were officially broke, Christopher offered to pay for them himself. Oswald and Honey each put on a bracelet, looking very excited about their new accessories. They gave the 3rd bracelet to the Duke, who found it actually quite touching. Continuing on their way, the girl looked up and suddenly froze in place. In the distance, the huge, snow-capped Mount McLeod towered over the houses and forests. It was the tallest mountain in the entire empire, visible from anywhere. This incredible, bitter cold, now concentrated in the heart of the country, had filled the people of the empire with fear for 500 years. Turning her head, Honey saw a kind-faced fruit vendor smiling at a young customer. The heroine knew that if everyone found out about her ability, no one would ever smile at her again. Meanwhile, the heroes slowly made their way to the top of the Hearn district, where the district's administrative building was located. A young man, engrossed in his work at a desk, was surprised to see someone walk in. Seeing it was the Duke, the guy freaked out and started trembling all over. He had no idea why His Highness was here, while Christopher was simply surprised by his reaction. The reason was that during his last visit, the Duke had left him with a huge pile of work. He only relaxed when he heard that His Highness was just here to hang out today and decided to introduce himself to the children. The Duke introduced him to the Crown Prince and the Princess, which stunned the young man. It turned out this guy's name was Bob, and he managed the district from the top of Herne Hill. Since His Highness was already here, Bob wanted to give Christopher a few documents to look over. The Duke hoped the children would wait for him quietly in the room while he stepped out for a bit. He truly believed that as long as they stayed here, nothing could possibly go wrong. Everything was fine until Honey, lost in thought while looking out the window, suddenly saw a terrible sight. She shot up from her chair, her terrified expression startling Oswald and leaving him confused. She ran out, hoping the boy would go get Christopher. Despite Oswald's protests, she couldn't ignore an adult being such a jerk to a child. She rushed outside, desperately looking for the knights who were with them. Turning a corner, she finally found Scott and the others, who were very surprised to see her. The knights were confused as to why the little princess was alone on the city streets. It was too dangerous here, and Scott needed to know what was going on. She grabbed the young knight's hand and begged him to come with her to help the poor girl. Scott looked at the other warriors in confusion, but they just nodded silently. He swept the princess into his arms and, along with the others, quickly ran in the direction she pointed. Suddenly, Honey saw the terrible scene up ahead that had made her defy the Duke's orders. Because the little girl denied having any money, the adult man angrily pushed her aside. He didn't believe a word of it and grabbed a glass bottle, preparing to force her to hand over the money. The problem was, according to the girl, the guy had already taken everything 2 days ago. Tearfully, she begged him to be reasonable, saying there was no way she could have gotten more money so quickly. The guy decided to test that and started threatening the girl by brandishing the bottle. But suddenly, a knight grabbed his arm, thinking that method was a bit too dangerous. At the same time, Scott turned Honey's head away, so she wouldn't see what was happening. He also asked the victim not to look and promised he would take care of everything. The guy started going crazy, insulting the knights and trying to break free. Then, one of the knights acted quickly, knocking the bottle out of the bastard's hand with a precise strike. Seeing that his attacker was a girl, the furious guy charged at her with his fist swinging. Fortunately, the knight blocked his punch, leaving the guy completely stunned. She flipped him over and sent the scumbag flying into the wall of the house with a powerful kick. The guy clutched the spot where she had hit him, trembling from the intense pain and the fear that washed over him. Just then, another knight stepped forward and pointed a sword at the villain's head, hoping it would finally shut him up. Suddenly, the guy noticed the bottle that had been knocked away lying right next to him. Driven mad by fear and anger, he told the soldiers to mind their own business and then threw the bottle forward. An instant before the bottle could hit Honey's head, Scott managed to catch it in midair. With a sinister smirk, the knight felt that this guy had finally crossed the line. Immediately after, the princess started hearing the guy's painful groans from behind her, so she covered her ears. The knights took out some rope and decided to do things by the book, tying him up. The guy was beaten half to death, and even while tied up, he kept hurling insults at the heroes. Just then, Scott snapped, knocking him out with a single karate chop that left everyone speechless. Honey glanced at the injured girl and could see distrust and contempt in her eyes. The princess decided to go see if the little girl she had saved was okay. The girl guessed it was the princess who had called the soldiers for help, but did this naive do-gooder really think the girl would be grateful for it? She couldn't care less about that kind of help and shot her savior a look of disgust. It was annoying enough to watch some rich person helping others, but it was even worse when that help came from greedy pity. Fearing the retaliation she and her mom would face later, the girl told the princess to take back her sympathy. Honey tried to explain that she was acting out of genuine compassion, but the girl wouldn't listen. She was furious that someone who dragged around 3 guards and demanded to be called Miss would dare to show sympathy. Seeing the knights tense up, the heroine signaled for them to stand down. The kid was right. Honey really didn't know anything about this world, but she knew very well how much it hurt to be hit, which was why she had rushed over. She grew curious and asked if the girl knew Princess Honey, Eleanor's daughter, which startled her. Seeing this reaction, the heroine showed her a hand covered in scars from being constantly hit. Honey had once been in so much pain that she wanted to die, but thanks to the help of others, she could finally live happily. This included the 3 knights who were with her now, protecting her. That's why the princess wanted to help. Seeing an adult hurt a child like that, it wasn't just a random act of kindness from an ignorant noble. The heroine wanted to share what she herself had received. So, Honey invited the girl to come with her to the imperial palace, if her parents would allow it. Just then, Christopher appeared behind our girl, furious and with Oswald tucked under his arm. Honey was happy to see them, but the kid was terrified at the sight of more nobles. The 2 heroes started firing off questions, wanting to know what what happened and if the princess was hurt. The Duke was shocked that she had run off like that, and the little girl just gave him a guilty smile. One of the knights volunteered to report what had happened. But looking at the little girl and the tied-up man, the hero was already starting to piece things together. After listening to the knight, the Duke learned that the victim's name was Judy. She confessed that the man who attacked her was actually her own father. Their family had inherited a shop from her grandfather, so they didn't have to work. Then her father got addicted to gambling, and after the money ran out, he pawned everything, the house, the shop, and then lost it all. So the father started drinking and forced me and my mom to work ourselves to the bone, just so he could gamble the money away again. Mom's friends and neighbors tried to help her divorce the bastard, but that just made him even angrier. Judy knew it was unforgivable for her to be so disrespectful to Her Highness. But the heroine completely understood her situation and hoped the kid would let her help. Christopher backed the princess up, thinking that since they had already started, they should see it through to the end. Just then, Judy decided to ask for help with her mom's divorce, but that was simply not possible. Opportunities like this didn't come often, so the Duke wanted the girl to be greedy. Besides, Christopher and Honey now had the power to solve all her problems for good. Judy was in a daze, still processing what she had heard, barely able to believe it was real. Later, the heroes were walking and talking about the heroine getting into the extremely prestigious National Academy. Honey could finally focus on her studies while Christopher helped Judy. Just then, Oswald and the princess started taking turns complimenting the hero, saying he was cool, smart, and rich. The Duke chimed in that he also had power, which made everyone laugh. He just hoped Honey wasn't trying to make him forget about the runaway incident by joking around. That day, the princess had to go back to the palace and recite 101 child safety rules. Judy's father was sent to prison, and things were sorted out for her and her mom so she could apply to the academy. This sudden change in the family's life caught the attention of the villagers, who never found out who had helped them. In addition to her teacher's lessons, the heroine was also taking etiquette classes with Lady Melissa. After all that hard studying, Honey's blood sugar dropped, and she started devouring sweets. Sitting at a table with the Empress, the girls suddenly saw Melissa start coughing violently without any warning. The Empress jumped up from her chair, coughing frantically and groaning in pain. Honey froze, completely unsure of what was happening, desperately trying to think of something. Then it hit her that the Empress had been pregnant all along. In her past life, Eleanor had poisoned Melissa, killing both her and her unborn child. Time passed, the pregnancy was confirmed, and Frederick and Constance came to congratulate the Empress. The children were also present, and Oswald was thrilled to learn he was going to have a little brother or sister. It had been 8 years since the last grandchild was born, so Constance suggested a grand celebration. Melissa thought it would be wonderful if the entire nation could share in this joy. But first, they had to go to the Temple of the God of Light to pray for the child's well-being. Honey also came forward to offer her congratulations and received a sincere thank you. The Empress could hardly wait to see how beautiful the child would be. Eleanor was gone, and no one would ever poison the lady again, but the heroine still felt a sense of unease. A few days later, the Emperor, his wife, and the children finally set off for the Temple of the God of Light. High Priest Kelvin came out to greet them, flanked by the temple's monks. They bowed deeply, welcoming the honored guests and servants of the God of Light, wishing them the power of the wind. Kelvin suddenly made eye contact with the heroine. Honey was very confused by this, and the High Priest began to speak with the Emperor. Kelvin was glad to hear that His Highness and the others had arrived safely. They were just exchanging pleasantries, but it seemed Frederick and the High Priest were friends and were comfortable with each other. After their conversation, they all headed to the main prayer hall, where a stone statue of the God of Light stood. First, everyone bowed, then cleansed their lips and hands with holy water. After that, it was time for everyone to kneel and pray for a while. The heroine watched as everyone prayed with their eyes closed, opening their hearts to God. Then, she turned her gaze to the statue of the God of Light, thinking back to the past. Before she died, she had prayed so many times, and now she was praying again. Honey was pretty sure her prayers wouldn't be answered, but hoped that this time God wouldn't turn a deaf ear to her. The girl sincerely wished for the safe birth of Melissa and Frederick's child. After the ceremony, the Emperor wanted to step away for a moment to speak with Kelvin. The Holy Father agreed and suggested the children take a walk in the church's courtyard for a while. Listening to him talk about the beautiful flowers here, she got a strange feeling that something was wrong. Unlike her, Oswald stared at Kelvin with wide eyes, as if completely mesmerized by him. The girl didn't understand why they needed to go somewhere else, but the crown prince suddenly insisted on the walk. As Honey was leaving, she couldn't shake the feeling that the Holy Father was sizing her up with a strange look. Suddenly, a terrible thought hit her. What if Kelvin found out about her ability? Scott and his partner accompanied the children, with the night gushing about the spring scenery the whole way. Scott decided he wanted a little brother just like Oswald, while his partner would be happy with a sister who could fence. Suddenly, an unbelievably beautiful garden appeared before them, filled with fragrant flowers and the colors of spring. The children were dumbstruck, and their escorts also stood there with their jaws on the floor. Oswald took on a thoughtful expression, remembering that it should be right around here. Not knowing what he was looking for, our girl suddenly felt a shadow fall over her. Something flew over their heads like a bolt of lightning, catching everyone off guard. The knights immediately rushed forward to protect the princess and the crown prince from the sudden attack. Scott grabbed Honey and leaped violently to the side. He then dropped to the ground, shielding the little girl with his body and holding her tight. Whatever it was, the hero was just glad the attempt to harm a child had failed. His partner wanted them to stay put while she dealt with the enemy, but to her surprise, the boy acted as if the whole thing was no big deal. Looking at where the uninvited guest had landed, the knight froze in disbelief. Up ahead, standing between them and Scott, who was holding Honey, was a giant tiger with a four-pointed star on its forehead. The princess warily sized up the furry behemoth, not knowing who he was or where he came from. Oswald said that he was the sacred guardian of this place, blessed by the god of light himself, and his name was Light. The heroine was completely baffled as to why this sacred tiger had suddenly appeared before her. Seeing Light begin to approach the princess, Scott jumped between them and drew his sword. Honey thought that because of her power, the tigers saw her as an enemy to be eliminated. Oswald quickly reassured the heroes, saying that Light had no intention of attacking at all. On the contrary, the tiger was super happy they were here, but was frustrated that they were blocking its path. Light walked up to the boy and held out a paw to greet him, much to his surprise. But suddenly, Oswald wagged his finger and began to scold the tiger. After all, Light had almost hurt Honey, so it needed to reflect on its actions. The tiger's ears immediately drooped, and it closed its eyes as a single tear rolled down its cheek. The boy rushed to the girl's side to make sure she wasn't really hurt. Honey felt she was okay, thanks to Scott, but the guy said he was just doing what he had to do. Besides, compared to what Commander Drake usually did, this was nothing. But Honey kept praising him, and Oswald chimed in as well. For the young knight, such praise was the best part of the job, even if it made him blush. The tiger snuck up behind the princess from out of nowhere and nuzzled her with its head, giving her a huge fright. Its eyes, however, were incredibly gentle. According to Oswald, Light was being particularly disobedient today. As he got closer to Honey, the boy guessed that she might have also sensed something strange when Kelvin sent them here. It was then she realized that he knew everything and was just acting on instinct. Honey gazed at Oswald and Light, who were both blessed by the god of light. She found them both incredibly cute, which, to be honest, confused the knights. I mean, how could a 4-meter tall tiger with a tail thicker than your wrist seem cute? Light walked up to the girl, nudged its nose into her hand, and then began to purr contentedly. She had seen beasts on the snowy mountain, but this one felt as warm as sunshine. The two kids started scratching the happy beast, whose eyes glazed over with bliss. This gentle kitten offered them its paw, much to the hero's excitement. Scott had heard this guy wasn't very friendly, so he was genuinely surprised now. But Honey just thought of it as a large stray cat in need of love and attention. Suddenly, they heard a confused shout from Captain Drake in the distance. The Emperor, escorted by the captain and some church officials, was heading their way. What in the world is going on here? Drake demanded as soon as he saw the tiger. Kelvin slapped his forehead, realizing Light had been away from Frederick for too long. The others, meanwhile, noticed how the princess looked so tiny next to the kitty. Hey, Honey shouted, very angry at being called short. The emperor himself had to apologize, and the Pope also promised they would be more careful in the future and try to prevent it from happening again. If the little one ever needed his help one day, Kelvin was ready to make it up to her. The heroine took note of this, thinking it might come in handy if her powers were to awaken. Suddenly, the tiger walked up to her, playfully licked her hand, and closed its eyes. Honey took this as an apology, while the servants, including Kelvin, were completely stunned, because they knew this divine beast was a total diva and wouldn't even let anyone touch it. The moment Frederick ordered them to leave, the look in Light's eyes completely changed. It bid the girl farewell with tears in its eyes, but there was nothing it could do. So Honey tied one of her ribbons to its paw, hoping the tiger would keep it until they met again. Light came out with all the servants to see the heroes off, waving goodbye with its ribbon-tied paw. The next morning, the princess was sleeping peacefully in her bed. She was having a sweet dream when suddenly, in her sleep, the girl felt her hand brush against something furry. She hugged something that felt like a soft, warm cloud and began to snore softly. But then a thought crossed her mind, and she woke with a start, jumping up and throwing off the blanket. Seeing a small tiger, she let out a scream of surprise. But in that instant, she recognized Light from the guest's features. The heroine was ecstatic about its arrival and shocked that the tiger could shrink like this, turning into a regular ginger cat. With that, Light gracefully made a fluid movement and leaped off the bed. The moment it landed, with a poof, it turned back into the giant tiger and grinned at Honey. The princess realized it had been punished yesterday for chasing her in that form. Honey was grateful for Light's presence, but if anyone else saw it, all hell would break loose. Just then, the cheerful Gerda entered the room, ready to wake the princess. Seeing a giant tiger by the bed, she froze and let out a terrified scream. After calming down, she pleaded with her highness not to make sound. The maid dropped to the floor, eyeing the beast warily like a commando, and crawled over to her mistress's bed, grabbed the girl, and dashed out of the room, screaming for help at the top of her lungs. Her screams caused complete chaos in the palace, terrifying everyone. Later, Frederick was alone with Honey and Light, calmly listening to the story of its sudden appearance. The princess held the little cat, certain that it had come to see her. What surprised the emperor most was that the tiger had even brought its own things, neatly packed in a basket, which clearly meant Light had no intention of going back. Realizing how things were unfolding, the little tiger jumped out of the heroine's arms, ran to the basket, and rummaged through its things. Light took out a huge green gem and happily presented it to the emperor. Frederick guessed the temple probably hadn't discovered it was missing yet, but Light absolutely had to go back. So the emperor decided to talk to the cat alone and asked Honey to step out for a moment. The emperor waited until the girl had left the office before he began to speak. He turned to the cat, confessing that even he could not control the fate of a divine creature. And even if he could, the divine beast leaving the temple for the princess was not a good omen for anyone. In that case, Honey would receive more attention than ever before. While this could certainly raise her status, combined with her ice powers, it could also do more harm than good. From the look on Light's face, Frederick realized the cat didn't see any problem with what he was saying. However, Honey was also in line for the throne after Oswald and Christopher, and if her name became associated with the divine beast, ill-intentioned nobles might take advantage of it. As her older brother, Frederick thanked the cat for its kindness toward his sister, but he didn't want to make things worse. Hoping to be understood, the emperor ordered Light to return to the temple. Just then, realizing there was no other way, the cat instantly vanished into thin air, leaving a golden trail. Looking at the remaining basket, Frederick wondered, did Light forget it, or did it refuse to give up? The emperor summoned Charles and ordered him to return the basket to the temple and ensure no rumors got out. 2 weeks later, Frederick was back in his office, buried in paperwork. Suddenly, a ginger cat materialized out of thin air, landed on his desk, and looked at the emperor with a stern gaze. The emperor hoped the divine beast would have the decency to get down on the floor on its own. Immediately after, the cat coughed up a letter from out of nowhere, placed it in front of Frederick, and then quickly jumped off the desk. The letter was personally written by Kelvin and was covered in cat saliva. The letter said that the animal wouldn't be this stubborn for no reason, and it would be better to let it stay in the palace. After reading the letter, the emperor admitted defeat. Light was so happy it almost purred, but its fur stood on end when it heard that Frederick had 2 conditions. The only way the cat could stay was to follow the rules, or it would have to go back. Light sat up straight, its ears perked, ready to hear what His Highness had to say. Rule 1. No one outside the royal family and your inner circle can know the divine beast is here. The second rule is more important. The emperor then leaned in and whispered it. After setting the rules, Frederick noticed the tiger's eyes had become very serious. Light took a step forward, raised its head, and looked the Emperor straight in the eye. Frederick took this as a sign that the deal was sealed. Watching the cat calmly lick its paw, the Emperor found it a bit strange. Suddenly, Honey burst into the office, overjoyed to see light. Frederick couldn't understand what this divine beast saw in the girl. The heroine was thrilled to learn that the tiger was staying at the palace. It was super persistent, but if things got tricky, Frederick could play dumb and send it back. Honey never dreamed that Light would like her so much and that they could stay together forever. Watching the pair promise to get along forever, the Emperor couldn't help but smile. Now he felt that it didn't seem so strange for a divine being to be drawn to such a lovely child. Plus, the princess had found herself a super strong bodyguard. A month later, when news first broke about the discovery of ice on Mount Hearn Summit, the reaction was mostly negative. This was because the ice business was notorious for bankrupting people quickly. But with a stable supply and low prices, Christopher became #1 in the market in just 1 month. He also managed to stabilize the price of ice regardless of the season and, with the help of the Duke's connections, shut down the black market merchants. Sitting in this pavilion with my brother, I feel half dead. Frederick knew that running a business in that state of mind must have been a real nightmare. Not far away, Melissa and the children were playing on the lawn, talking and laughing. Christopher had already heard the rumors about the divine beast and wanted to see it for himself, but it was probably napping somewhere. The Emperor was a nervous wreck about it at first, but now he realized he had been worrying for nothing. It got along great with Honey, and the cat was even ready to give her a whole basket of jewels. The Duke was completely baffled, wondering where this divine beast got all this stuff. Did it rob some priest? But it turned out that all those treasures actually belonged to it. This was strange because you don't usually see creatures from the temple caring about human jewelry. But this cat was different and would do anything to win the heroine's affection. So the kids gave Light a new nickname because its name was supposed to show its affection for the god of light, right? When Christopher heard they called it Furball, he choked on his tea and almost died. I mean, for a divine beast, this tiger was indeed still a cub, but it was the size of a house, and the name Furball just didn't fit. Meanwhile, Melissa and the children continued to laugh and chat about all sorts of trivial things. Honey was curious if her mistress wanted a boy or a girl. The Empress thought about it and felt that before she would have wanted a daughter since she already had a son. But now she didn't care if it was a boy or a girl because Honey was like a real daughter to Melissa. It was so heartwarming that steam was practically coming out of the heroine's ears and her face turned bright red, which made the Empress laugh. Oswald sat there with a genuine smile on his face, laughing along with everyone. The Duke observed the boy carefully, his mind racing, and decided he needed to have a good talk with him. Frederick was surprised he was taking Oswald so soon, especially since he was planning to make more ice with Honey. But Christopher insisted that he had to take the crown prince with him today. Later, the Duke chatted with him while helping him pack his things. The boy was surprised his uncle would come to help, knowing how tired he was. Suddenly, the Duke asked if the prince was frustrated about having to share everything with Honey. After all, before this, everything in the family belonged only to him. It had been that way since birth. The boy thought about it and remembered hearing this question before. When Honey first moved into the palace, a maid wondered if Oswald was worried the princess would make him less loved by his family. But he was sure that just because Mom and Dad loved the girl, it didn't mean they would love him any less. The crown prince never felt like he was sharing anything with her, but rather that they were getting enough love together. It wasn't just about him and Honey, but also about their unborn baby. Oswald felt his uncle was overreacting, but Christopher was stunned. After a slight chuckle, he realized he had learned something deeper about his nephew today. He grabbed Oswald and started hugging him tightly, which completely bewildered the boy. When he called the boy his precious baby, Oswald was completely stunned because Frederick and Melissa were his parents. Standing behind the door, Honey heard how Christopher thought of his brother's child as his own. She had intended to come over earlier with an ice pack, but now everything had taken an unexpected turn. The crown prince had no idea how much strength his sincere love gave the girl. Although she was still scared and uncertain, the boy's vibrant spirit allowed her to keep going. Even in the dark, Honey hoped the upcoming baby would receive just as much love. The next day, Melissa looked up from her magazine to say something to the princess, but to her surprise, the child was completely asleep, slumped over in her chair. Fast asleep. Hearing the Empress's voice, the girl immediately sat up straight, pretending she hadn't been sleeping at all. Melissa suggested canceling her lessons so she could rest, but Honey was very eager to learn. After apologizing for the trouble, our girl hurried off to her class. Watching the princess leave, Melissa felt she might be feeling unwell due to the change of seasons and was very worried about her and the prince. So she decided to write a letter to Christopher and brew some medicinal tea for the children. It felt like this summer had passed by in a flash, perhaps because so many crazy things had happened. The Empress believed that this year would surely be forever etched in their memories. Meanwhile, a person in a dark cloak stood opposite the palace entrance, watching everything unfold. Melissa lay on the floor of the dim room, barely able to breathe. Agnes arrived just in time to administer the antidote and save the Empress, but the child in her womb was lost. The news hit the heroine like a bolt from the blue, filling her with utter despair and fear. Like a monster, Eleanor grabbed the baby's body and let out a blood-curdling laugh. The woman couldn't believe that a twisted freak like Honey could ever think she deserved to be happy. At that moment, the girl woke up in a cold sweat, trembling with fear. Gasping for air, she slowly came to her senses from the nightmare she just had. She hadn't gotten a good night's sleep again tonight and rubbed her tired eyes. Just because Eleanor was dead didn't mean things were over. The woman's accomplice, the one who helped her poison the Empress, was still in the palace. The problem was, the poor child knew nothing about him. Her mind was a mess, so she decided to go outside for some fresh air. In the dead of night, she was startled when she heard a sound nearby. Just then, she saw a guy in a dark cloak staring at the palace. There was a ram skull design on the back of the cloak, which made him look even more sinister. A thought flashed through her mind, and Honey collapsed to the ground, frozen in sheer terror. Because she had seen that exact same cloak before, right before she went back in time. Back then, she was wandering the palace where she lived with her mother, looking for something to eat. Suddenly, she saw a man in that cloak talking to Eleanor at the end of the hallway. She overheard them saying they were planning something and that the woman agreed to wait a little longer. At the time, the girl was hiding behind a nearby dresser, with no idea who this was or what the deal was with the robe. Now, the same thing was happening again at the same time with the same outfit, and this guy was acting super suspicious. The heroine was pretty sure that this was Eleanor's accomplice, but from that distance, it was impossible to see a face, especially since his back was turned. Judging by the dress, it seemed to be one of the servants. Honey sat on the grass and sighed sadly, wishing she knew more. She felt it was her duty to uncover the identity of the robed figure and protect Lady Melissa. Suddenly, Furball appeared, and the heroine stared at it intently. She wanted to send the cat to the Empress's side as a personal guard. The girl hoped the divine beast would grant her request, as only it could protect her mistress discreetly. The cat meowed as if to say, okay, and the child thanked it and let it go. With a poof, it just vanished into thin air, leaving a golden glow. Suddenly, the girl heard a strange sound behind her, rustling leaves and such. She was terrified, realizing someone else was heading this way. So she hid and peeked out, trying to see who would emerge from the woods. Out came another person in a dark cloak, but this one was plain, with no design. She thought it was just another of Eleanor's minions and tried to get a good look at his face. When she saw it was just a kid, Honey let out a gasp. In that instant, she realized she had been completely discovered. Seeing the child had bright red hair, our girl suddenly understood. The young man never expected to meet his sister here. He straightened up, looking at her and thinking, what the hell? Honey was equally surprised to see Terence. Although the former emperor had an adult wife, Constance, and 2 children, he took 2 more wives. When he died, he left behind 4 children, including Honey, born to Eleanor, and Terence, born to the second wife. And now, our girl had run into this former young prince out of nowhere. She couldn't figure out what brought the boy here, as his family basically never left their palace. Terence thought for a moment, and then decided he absolutely could not tell his sister, especially since the princess was still in her pajamas, not to mention her indoor slippers. If our girl wanted to be a member of the royal family, she needed to start watching how she acted and spoke. Honey was stunned by his audacity, not understanding how he could be so condescending. She confessed that she had just come out for some fresh air and ended up here. After that, an awkward silence hung in the air making the girl feel uneasy. Realizing she probably had nothing else to say, Terrence turned to leave. The princess knew it was about a 40-minute walk back to their palace. This meant the kid was hiding something. Was his family involved in the poisoning too? The next morning, the child stood by the window, thinking about what happened last night. Then she headed to Melissa's. Terrence's sudden appearance was on her mind, but protecting the Empress was the top priority now. Honey guessed the culprit was probably one of the maids and suddenly ran into some servants in the hallway. The girls were carrying some boxes and didn't understand why the princess would be here. At this hour, the heroine stared intently at the maids, who smiled sweetly at her. The child knew little about them, only that one of the maids had been serving the Empress for a long time. Seeing her serious little face, the girls guessed Her Highness must have something important to say. They thought Honey was in her pajamas because her attendant wasn't doing her job, but the little girl corrected them. She just had a nightmare about her mom and wanted to see Lady Melissa as soon as possible. The maids were touched by what they heard and decided to split up, one to escort the little princess and the other to fetch some medicine. Honey was surprised to hear that their boxes contained medicine sent by Christopher at the Empress's request. Hearing the Duke's name, the little one froze in terror as various possibilities flashed through her mind. Now, if she wasn't careful, the bad guys might even try to frame Christopher. After that, she rushed to the Empress as fast as her legs could carry her. Melissa didn't expect such an early visit from the little princess and was completely caught off guard. "Good morning, Your Majesty," the girl said, glad to see she looked so strong and healthy. The Empress was curious what brought her over so early in the morning. The little girl looked sad and confessed that she had a terrible nightmare. That was why she wanted to stay with Melissa. The Empress jumped up and rushed to the girl's side, holding her tightly. The Empress tried to dispel all the terrible thoughts from a dream, believing it was just a dream that would never come true. Just then, Honey remembered the sight of Melissa lying on the ground, almost lifeless, but she believed, just as the Empress said, that dreams don't become reality. The Empress ordered a servant to go to the princess's palace, inform them she was here, and bring her some clothes, as well as prepare breakfast. She also wanted the handmaidens to prepare a medicinal tea to be served after the meal. It turned out this tonic was actually for the little one, just a health supplement. The protagonist was stunned. If the medicine wasn't for the Empress, then what about the poison? When she learned that some of the medicine was also for Oswald, Honey worried he was sick. But Melissa figured, hey, a little extra immunity wouldn't hurt him. After all, that child possessed some powerful abilities, which completely shocked the little girl. He was born very weak, but his health later began to improve. He was fine now, but Melissa still worried like any parent and showed the same concern for Honey. So she hoped the girl could bear it, even if the potion tasted awful. Afterward, the princess stayed with Melissa, waiting for a servant to bring her a change of clothes. She was thrilled to be able to spend the whole day with the Empress. There was no chance to search the kitchen now, so I could only follow closely and stay vigilant. A short while later, two handmaidens appeared together, which surprised the Empress a little. One of them was the handmaiden who had worked for the Empress the longest. She had already notified the kitchen, and breakfast was almost ready. Melissa was grateful and happy that things were proceeding smoothly, but one thing was bothering the two girls. They had been hesitating whether to tell the Empress, but finally decided to come clean. Apparently, a third handmaiden was having some trouble, as she had been looking gloomy all the time. The other servants couldn't get a word out of her, so Melissa decided to check on her personally. The girls also recalled that this handmaiden had snuck out somewhere at night, which they knew because her coat wasn't where it should be. At that, the little one was terrified, thinking that the person in the robe must have been her. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, and guess what? It was the very handmaiden we were just talking about. All right, everyone was here. The two ladies entered the dining room and took their seats. First, a few attendants served some pickled mushrooms as an appetizer. Our girls sat there nervously, just waiting for the poisoning to happen. But the food was fine, and the Empress and the princess began to enjoy it. Looking again at the gloomy handmaiden they mentioned earlier, it was obvious something was on her mind. But honestly, would someone about to commit a crime really be this flustered? Suddenly, our protagonist caught a death glare from the servant who had worked for Melissa the longest. Just then, merely from that one look, the girl's hands began to tremble uncontrollably, making her unable to use her utensils. Meanwhile, the Empress was calmly eating her breakfast, completely unaware of what was happening. The Empress suddenly picked up a glass of water, which made Honey even more nervous. Just then, the girl remembered that the poison was in the cup with the hot drink. She had to do something quickly, but unfortunately, she couldn't inform Her Majesty about any of this. Just then, a handmaiden came in with a tray, carrying 2 cups of herbal tea. Melissa had only asked for one, but the person who gave the tea to the handmaiden felt the unborn child needed a boost as well. The Empress thought the girl was very thoughtful and happily agreed. Honey stared intently at the handmaiden, watching her place both cups on the table. She suspected it was this handmaiden, but the girl was shocked, as this was the very handmaiden who had worked for her mistress for over 10 years. The handmaiden tested the temperature of the drink with a probe and suggested the child do the same. Our girl agreed, and she noticed the handmaiden was carefully watching her every move. While pulling out the temperature probe, she accidentally knocked over the cup, spilling its contents everywhere. Honey started to apologize, but Melissa reassured her, saying the important thing was that it didn't spill on her clothes. Then she asked the handmaiden to make another medicinal tea, and that girl smiled and readily agreed. After she left, our girl finally had a moment to figure out how to get the message to His Majesty. First, she opened the window and summoned her pet. She hoped to get its help, gently nuzzling its nose. She was glad the little fur ball was safe and sound, and hoped it was doing well. She decided to send a letter to the Emperor through it, but there was no paper nearby. With no other choice, our protagonist wrote the letter directly on a napkin. Now, the cat needed to rush to His Majesty immediately and deliver the letter as quickly as possible. As soon as it disappeared, a handmaiden came in, wanting to change Her Highness's clothes. This girl's name was Fedora, the one people said had been gloomy lately. After helping Miss Honey change into her dress, she asked her to wait a moment, saying she had something to tell her. But then she froze, as if unable to speak. You see, Fedora was clenching her hands tightly, just staring at the floor, her face filled with despair. Just then, the girl decided to ask her directly if she knew there was something in the herbal tea. The moment the words were out, the handmaiden's face filled with terror, and she broke out in a cold sweat. It turned out she wasn't the one who did it, as she swore she would never do such a thing. Fedora admitted that the tea was poisoned, which stunned our girl. The girl felt terrible, seeing that someone had forced this handmaiden to be involved. Now was not the time, but the girl hoped to learn the full truth from her later. Honey was very grateful for the girl's courage and honesty. Thanks to her, the princess was now completely certain and rushed back to the Empress's side. Back inside, the child was conflicted, wondering if she should reveal everything now and ask for help. Just then, Melissa was sitting leisurely across from our girl, casually flipping through a magazine. Honey decided not to drop the bombshell right away. She didn't want to say it so rashly. The truth would come out eventually, and the little one just hoped it wouldn't crush her. Seeing the handmaiden enter again with the tray, our girl decided to wait for the right moment. After checking the temperature, the handmaiden invited them to drink the tea, but Honey suddenly refused. She asked to let the tea cool a bit longer, which the Empress found a little amusing. So Melissa decided to take a sip first, but the princess suddenly screamed and jumped up. Both the handmaiden and the Empress stared at her, completely baffled by her reaction. She didn't want to wait any longer. Pulling a silver pocket watch from her pocket and frantically dipping it into the cup of herbal tea, hoping the silverware would react if it was poisoned. Melissa looked at the handmaiden in confusion, whose face was expressionless. Just then, the handmaiden started to become suspicious of the little girl. Honey took the watch out of the cup, and, to her surprise, it was perfectly fine. The handmaiden smiled, thinking the princess was having another nightmare. But the girl suddenly asked the handmaiden to hand her a handkerchief. The handmaiden didn't understand why, but the protagonist suddenly became aggressive. She knew that testing for poison that way was completely useless. The handmaiden must have tampered with the part of the cup that touches the lips. After wiping the cup with a handkerchief and then wiping the pocket watch, they began to turn black right before my eyes. So, it was a hard fact that the cup was poisoned, and the little girl's gaze snapped towards the Empress. Melissa's face darkened with fear, her eyes unable to move from the pocket watch. Just then, the handmaiden grabbed Honey's arm, pulling her with all her might. Then she threw the little girl to the ground, which made the Empress jump to her feet. The handmaiden was furious, not understanding how this little brat had found out. That girl lifted her skirt, pulled out a knife strapped to her leg, and apologized to the Empress in advance. Melissa stared in shock at this handmaiden who had served her the longest, unwilling to believe what was happening. The handmaiden screamed, as she had never imagined things would go this far. The protagonist knew it was too late to stop the culprit now, and the guards were nowhere in sight. Her only option was to use her ice abilities. There was no other choice. So she began to focus her ice magic in her hands. Then she formed a ball of ice, preparing to freeze this lunatic solid. Just then, the door was thrown open, and Captain Drake burst in, leading a group of knights. The handmaiden was ordered to drop her weapon immediately and raise her hands. Considering she was still a threat, the little girl suddenly ran up and gave her a push. The woman was caught off guard and fell face first to the ground, the knife clattering from her hand. She glared at the protagonist, utterly enraged by this little brat. But in that instant, several knights' swords were pointed at the culprit, pinning her to the ground. The Empress stared blankly at the woman who was once her most loyal handmaiden. Honey and Melissa watched as the knights dragged away the criminal, who was screaming and struggling like a madwoman. Just then, the Emperor rushed in, his eyes wide with alarm as he looked at the Empress and the princess. First, he needed to make sure the girls weren't hurt. Seeing they were safe, Frederick pulled his wife and little sister into a tight embrace. The Empress couldn't stay in this palace now. She needed to see a healer as soon as possible. Honey shifted uneasily, wanted to tell the Emperor something. But Melissa suddenly cut her off, pulling her into a gentle, big hug. The Empress had a ton of questions too, but she knew the little one was just trying to protect her. So, despite Honey's reckless behavior, the Empress thanked her for her courage and for saving her life. The protagonist was glad the culprit was dealt with, but at this moment, she could feel immense pressure from the Emperor. Suddenly, Frederick decided it was the princess's turn. It sent a shiver down her spine. He couldn't figure out how she knew who the culprit was, how she knew it was poison, and why she had acted alone. Then the protagonist asked if the Emperor knew she had been falling asleep all over the place lately. Frederick nodded, thinking it was due to a fever, but it turned out that was just a cover. I mean, the girl could have said she was having nightmares every night about Melissa collapsing from poison. That was also why she went for walks at night, to calm her frayed nerves. Besides, she thought her feelings were just a coincidence, and she wrote everything else in the letter. Honey didn't deny her actions, but she wanted to come straight to the Emperor as soon as she found a lead on the culprit. At first she thought it was just a nightmare, then she started suspecting the handmaidens, and then she noticed a lot of strange things. We couldn't make a move because that handmaiden was always lurking nearby, so the child decided to send a letter instead. But the handmaiden still managed to prepare the potion, so our girl had to stop her. Honey started to sob, realizing how much danger she had put the Empress in. But Frederick didn't want her to blame herself, and Melissa was grateful to her. Things could have turned out very badly, so the Emperor thanked her personally. To his surprise, the girl said she didn't want to hear that anymore. She was just protecting the family she loved, not looking for praise. Frederick was impressed by her words, apologized, and promised not to bring it up again. He knew it wasn't easy for the little one to do all this alone and told her to get some rest. Meanwhile, the knights showed up with some intel. They had found evidence in the kitchen. The Emperor felt these words were not for a child's ears, so he had Drake take the girl away. Agnes then appeared in the kitchen, and after analyzing the poison, she found that symptoms only appeared after a latency period. It was colorless, odorless, and had no obvious symptoms to distinguish it from other poisons. If the Empress had drunk that stuff, neither she nor anyone else would have known she was poisoned. It would leave no evidence, so even Agnes couldn't have detected the poison and would have been helpless. After that, a heavy silence hung in the air for a few seconds. Frederick realized that if this poison was so hard to detect, it could be anywhere in the palace. This meant they had to lock down the palace and evacuate the royal family as soon as possible. But Agnes and Drake also knew that an ordinary servant couldn't have obtained that kind of poison on her own. And what if the real target wasn't just Melissa, but the entire imperial family? Meanwhile, Viola was greeting the lady in the palace, having already heard about everything that happened. Now she just wanted the protagonist to get changed and rest from it all. Just then, a servant announced that Fedora had come to see her. To see the princess. A handmaiden glanced nervously at Viola, wanting to say something to Honey. Then she suddenly fell to her knees and kowtowed, startling both girls. The handmaiden never thought that woman would threaten Lady Melissa. She also knew it was a capital offense, unforgivable. But Fedora's younger siblings were innocent, and she begged for them to be protected. The princess wasn't trying to interrogate her. She just wanted to hear everything she knew. It turned out Fedora was just an observer, and if everything had failed, she was supposed to do the deed herself. She didn't want to at all, but her father gave the girl no other choice. The handmaiden who tried to poison her mistress didn't know about Fyodor, or even who was behind it all. Honey guessed it might be Terrence's family, which made the handmaiden freeze in terror. But she didn't want to say anything because she knew the little princess might not be able to handle it. Just then, Honey remembered when she was a young and helpless princess. Regardless, the child promised to protect Fedora's siblings, and in return, she asked that everything be reported to the emperor. The girl was very grateful to the princess for trusting and listening to her. The next day, Frederick ordered the palace to be locked down and all members of the royal family to be evacuated. Melissa, Oswald, and Constance immediately left for the family's remote estate. Afterward, an investigation was immediately launched among the palace staff. Since Honey was a key witness, the emperor decided to keep her for a brief talk. He really wanted to know how this little child had figured out the culprit. It turned out the handmaiden had checked the princess's hand to confirm she was right-handed. As soon as we walked in, she prepared the medicine in a cup with a handle. That's when Honey understood that the culprit planned to take advantage of the empress's habit of holding her cup with her left hand, not her right. The potion itself wasn't poisoned, but the handmaiden was observing which side of her mouth Melissa drank from. The cup was still on the table, and Honey pointed directly at the spot. The poison was right there. Our girl hadn't checked, but she was sure the same could have happened with the other cups. That was all the princess knew, and the emperor sent Captain Drake to verify the information. A short while later, everything she said was confirmed, which stunned Frederick. He knew Honey was smart, of course, but he had no idea just how smart she really was. He figured it all came from him, and the emperor patted the child's head. Seeing Drake smirking at this, Frederick wondered what was with the captain's smug grin. Most importantly, the poison was found in a box sent by Christopher, which was terrible. It seemed the culprit not only wanted to frame the Duke, but also wanted to use the child to divert everyone's attention. Assuming Melissa drank the poison and Honey knew nothing, the list of suspects would have expanded dramatically. That handmaiden would have been the prime suspect, but the princess would have immediately cleared her. She would have sworn she didn't administer any poison, and Honey would have backed her up, which is why she had the child taste it first. Suddenly, the little one decided to drop another bombshell on Frederick. The emperor was stunned, trying to figure out where his little sister was getting all this intelligence. So, our girl came clean to the emperor, telling him every detail about Fedora. Frederick was grateful for the information, but he was very worried about how deeply the child was involved. If all this was confirmed, then the mastermind basically controlled the entire region. First, they had to find Fedora and figure out what she knew. It was clear this was serious, but now the emperor would be extra careful. I mean, he was still shaken from yesterday when the culprit named the mastermind. To Honey's shock, the mastermind was her own mother, Eleanor, which made her freeze on the spot. But since Eleanor was dead, she couldn't have been directly involved, though maybe she was still connected somehow. The protagonist realized that unlike the poison her mother got, this one was a different kind, which meant someone else must have procured it. Just then, Honey remembered that chance encounter with Terrence in the woods at night. They searched the culprit's room and found evidence of a transaction. Now we just need to figure out the connection to Eleanor. We have to be careful until we catch the culprit. The emperor decided to punish that woman's family in the meantime. The child worried that Eleanor might have acted alone, but Frederick was sure they were involved too. Her family were bankrupt nobles, barely scraping by on their meager estate. After Eleanor's death, their connection to the emperor was severed, and they started getting involved in some shady dealings. The emperor had turned a blind eye to it all this time, but now it was time to bring them to justice. Frederick knew this kind of news could affect Honey, so he wanted her to head to the estate. First thing, tomorrow morning. The next day, the emperor sentenced the culprit to death, stripped Eleanor's family of their status, and confiscated all their assets. Another day passed, and when the news broke, the entire empire went wild. Frederick looked at the frantic headlines, completely overwhelmed. As he expected, public opinion of Honey plummeted, so sending her to the estate was the only option. As Viola packed, she couldn't understand why a princess who saved the empress's life had to run away. But Honey was calm about it, since her family was at the estate. Besides, The region where the estate was located was famous for its stunning scenery. Looking at the handmaiden, the protagonist had no idea how shocked Melissa must have been after being betrayed by her closest servant. When the carriage was ready and the luggage was packed, the girls were about to get in when Drake suddenly knocked on the door. The captain's face was etched with alarm, which terrified both girls. The first thing he did was make sure the little one was okay, especially after last night. Drake was relieved to hear that Honey had returned to her room safely after yesterday's meeting. To the princess's horror, it turned out that Fedora had simply vanished last night. She had been arrested as a suspect and was awaiting interrogation, but when they went to see her in the morning, the handmaiden was gone. Now, they were searching for her everywhere, and since Honey was the last person to see her before the arrest, Drake decided to come here. The Emperor even summoned Fedora's father over this, suspecting her family might be involved in the escape. The children were sure the handmaiden didn't disappear on her own, which made Drake sigh heavily. He was also thinking that the real client had eliminated Fedora to cover their tracks. After their talk, the captain hastily sent knights to escort the protagonist back to the estate. The girl wondered if this was what Fedora had been afraid of, or if she had really just run away. Upon arriving at the estate, Honey was curious what everyone was so busy with this late. Charles, whom the protagonist hadn't seen in a long time, greeted them by a map, and she wondered where everyone else was. The head butler apologized for what he was about to say, and it turned out Lady Melissa had a miscarriage. Honey froze, her eyes wide, as Viola covered her face in horror. It all happened so fast, and His Highness could arrive at any moment. The girl broke free from Viola's grasp and sprinted towards the mansion. But then her strength gave out, and she collapsed on the path, completely breaking down. Charles personally escorted the girls into the mansion, where a sorrowful silence filled the air. They walked into the room and saw Agnes, Constance, Oswald, and Christopher gathered around Melissa's bed. The queen lay there, her eyes closed, her usually radiant face now paler than ever. The queen mother pulled Honey and Oswald to her side and wrapped her arms around them. The physician had done everything he could to ease her abdominal pain and stop the bleeding. Constance couldn't understand. Agnes had just assured her that Melissa and the baby were both fine. The miscarriage was likely caused by the immense stress she had been under, but sometimes these things just happened. However, the one thing the healer was certain of was that this had absolutely nothing to do with poison.